In the first scenes of the film, a woman is driving a car on a night highway. Suddenly, an unknown woman's voice speaking Russian comes from the radio. Joe translates for her daughter Alice, explaining that the woman believes the world has turned upside down. A police car appears behind them, and an unknown device lying next to Joe starts blinking alarmingly, but the police car drives past. Soon, the pair arrives at a small house. Joe starts a fire and puts the child to bed. She then goes outside to check the device left in the car but hears her daughter scream and rushes back inside. However, Alice is asleep. Joe runs outside again, hears her daughter scream again, and runs off into the night. 5 weeks earlier, Joe is floating weightlessly as part of a group of astronauts on the International Space Station. She only sees her daughter and husband Magnus via video calls, and she conducts her next session from the cold nuclear fusion laboratory where Mission Commander Paul is working. He adjusts the equipment according to instructions from scientist Henry Calder on Earth. The scientists are searching for a new state of matter, but no one knows what it is. Suddenly, something crashes into the space station. Communication with Earth is lost, and a fire breaks out. Additionally, the commander's hand is trapped, and one of the Soyuz ships is severely damaged. Roscosmos takes charge of the repairs while the mission's doctor amputates Paul's hand. Henry insists they must save the capsule containing the cold fusion experiment results. Meanwhile, Joe goes into open space to inspect the crash site, unaware that Paul's heart has stopped. Suddenly, video contact with Joe is lost, and the center can only hear her communications. She then sees the cause of the accident: a desiccated body of a female astronaut in an orange suit labeled USSR. Joe tries to catch it, but the space mummy floats away. Joe reports everything to her colleague, and Irina, the head of Roscosmos, hears it on Earth. Learning of the commander's death, the center orders 3 mission members to return to Earth on Soyuz 2, while Joe repairs Soyuz 1 and returns on it. An emergency mode is set in the ship. Joe sketches the body she saw, sends it to the center, and begins repairs. Meanwhile, Irina tells Henry she ordered his equipment to be left on the station, as it may have caused the accident. Henry argues that this experiment could change humanity's life and must be brought back. The returning Soyuz 2 astronauts are greeted on Earth. Joe is asked to retrieve the capsule with the experiment results, after which communication is lost. On Earth, Henry brings equipment for a rescue mission to Baikonur, but Irina reports that there are no signs of life on the station. Joe is alive and continues repairing the equipment, resting in the shuttle where Paul's body lies. Later, she records a message for her family, but unexpectedly hears a man's voice telling her not to breathe. She flies to the laboratory door and, opening it, sees Paul reaching out to her. Joe shakes his hand, realizing it's the commander's severed limb. Meanwhile, on Earth, Henry pulls strings to send a rescue mission to the station, avoiding questions about his twin brother. At this time, his twin brother Pat Calder is on vacation on a cruise ship, answering a journalist's questions about his spaceflight and snapping at her for confusing him with his brother. Joe restores the power supply of Soyuz 1 and returns for the cold fusion capsule. She records a final message to her family and launches the shuttle. Unexpectedly, the automatic detachment doesn't work. It must be done manually from inside the station. Joe, in desperation, punches the console as a shadow approaches the inner control panel and the system activates. The shuttle heads to Earth, where Joe is presumed dead. The module soon lands in a deserted steppe, where rescuers find Joe and help her out. She is placed on a stretcher and taken to a helicopter. However, Alice rushes to her, and Joe happily embraces her daughter and husband, who seems to doubt his wife's genuine joy at seeing him. Henry retrieves the capsule, and Joe is taken to the helicopter where her family is already seated. But suddenly, Joe finds herself alone in an empty vehicle. Then everything returns to normal. She decides it's due to stress. She speaks to her daughter in Swedish, but Alice doesn't understand her. Meanwhile, Henry rejoices over the successful quantum mechanics experiment results conducted on the ISS. Joe recovers after the flight. One day at a press conference, she expresses condolences to the widow of the deceased astronaut Paul, but the woman's name turns out to be different. Henry demonstrates the experiment results obtained on Earth. His assistant is sure this is only possible in space, dismissing it as a glitch. At Baikonur, an investigation into the tragedy begins. The commission reviews orbital recordings. When Joe mentions the object that caused the accident, a Soviet female astronaut's body, no one believes her since there has never been a report of a missing female astronaut in history. Later, Joe receives vitamin tablets she must take daily. She tries to get closer to her husband, not noticing he seems to avoid her. Alice also keeps her distance from her mother. The next day, Joe faces the commission again, which tries to convince her that the station collided with an orange garbage bag. After the session, her boss, Frederick, tries to hug her, but she steps back in confusion. He doesn't understand why she has forgotten everything between them. Scared, Jo returns to her husband in tears, confesses her love, and they become intimate. Meanwhile, Henry tells Alice about a thought experiment in quantum mechanics called Schrödinger's cat. Scientists believed the world was governed by classical physics laws until geniuses like Einstein discovered that the same substance could exist in two forms. For example, a particle is black in one world and white in another. Between worlds, there is space where the particle is both black and white simultaneously, refusing to choose until observed. Henry invented equipment for the space experiment and discovered something, but it seems unwilling to come into the light. Magnus confesses his wife has changed completely. Henry comes to thank Jo for saving the capsule. She recalls he worked on the Apollo mission, and the old man warns that people who go through the space often change. Later, the team goes to the memorial alley, and Jo shows friends a photo of the spacesuits she saw in space, but she's told it's Irina, the current director of the Flight Control Center. The colleagues reach the tree planted by Commander Paul before the flight and lay flowers. When Jo is alone, she suddenly sees Paul, who tells her his heart is still hanging in space. After this, Jo acknowledges the commission's correctness and retracts her initial testimony. Her family heads home, where Jo notices some inconsistencies. For example, the car is blue, but Jo remembers it was red. The family congratulates Jo on past Christmas and her birthday. She jokes and laughs, though Magnus admits he believed their marriage was over. The next morning, Jo walks around the house and suddenly sees a piano. She sits at it and opens the sheet music. In the evening, Jo again notices her daughter doesn't understand her Swedish, though the girl spoke it fluently before the flight. Magnus admits he knew about her affair with a colleague, Frederick. This perplexes Jo as it's not true. Henry recalls a formula where the main stress relief component is lithium-7. Jo visits a psychologist who prescribes her the antidepressant lithium. Henry notices her and invites her to see his laboratory, where he talks about astronauts who heard non-existent sounds and smells after flights. But this is kept secret. Then Henry reports to the management that using laser and magnets in the cold fusion laboratory, he obtained an image identical to the one from the quantum physics experiment on the ISS. He tried to capture the moment when a substance exists in two different states simultaneously. The same experiment with Schrödinger's cat, which can't be determined if it's alive or dead. But only Henry sees the results. Apparently, this is the observer effect, where the experiment influences the experimenter. Jo approaches the piano again and starts playing this time, scaring herself because she never knew how to play. The next day, Jo compares the vitamins she received at Baikonur with the prescribed medicine and finds that both contain lithium-7. Suddenly, she sees two workers and hides in an office, finding a list of astronauts. Each name has a letter, and checking those under B, she discovers they were all prescribed lithium-7 and experienced unusual things. Meanwhile, the workers enter the office, ignore Jo, and start stacking folders on a cart. She tries to get their attention, but seems invisible. Jo approaches a man closely. He screams and disappears. Jo is alone in the office again. She goes to Henry's office, but he suddenly accuses her of excessive curiosity that will ruin her. Later, her colleague Frederick visits, not understanding what happened as they loved each other. Jo avoids the conversation. At home, Jo finds a package with tapes on the table. It turns out the Marine Observatory workers, unlike the Flight Control Center, heard her calls from space and recorded them, now sending them to her. Jo plays the tapes and hears her voice when Alice comes downstairs and sees a room filled with mourning people. Live astronaut Paul with his family, and Jo's portrait in a mourning frame at the center. She screams, but her father carries Alice upstairs, where his wife admits all her pills are neuroleptics, meaning she's been intentionally habituated to them. She believes she was heard but deliberately left to die in space. Magnus grabs the phone to have her taken for treatment, but Jo pushes him, and he falls, hitting the floor. Jo pulls herself together, calls an ambulance, and asks Alice to get in the car. On the way, she stops by the laboratory and steals the flask with the substance obtained in the quantum physics experiment. Henry hears a knock at the door but finds no one in the hallway when he opens it. The scientist closes the door, not noticing his twin brother Pat, who briefly appears behind him and then disappears. Irina calls, having just read an article about two particles entangled by quantum mechanics, where what happens to one determines the state of the other, even if they are far apart. He hangs up without responding. Jo calls Russian cosmonaut Ilya to ask what vitamins he was given on the ISS. He reads out the name with letter A. Joe explains that, unlike the rest of the crew, she was given neuroleptics. The cosmonaut is skeptical, but she asks him to check his pills and wait for her call. Henry discovers the flask theft. The next morning, Joe asks her daughter to describe her fears in detail. The girl admits she hears the voice of an unknown woman named Valia. Joe steps aside to call the observatory worker who sent her the tapes, but he unexpectedly claims it couldn't have been her and hangs up. Meanwhile, Alice brings her a drawing of her fear, showing the figure of a female astronaut in an orange suit, whom Joe saw dead in space. Ilya checks his pills, which turn out to be vitamins. However, documents on the substances given to Joe are no longer accessible. Joe arrives at the Marine Observatory and meets the brother and sister who sent her the tapes. The elderly couple clearly heard her voice from space and recorded it. However, the recordings can only be heard on their ship at sea. They take Joe and Alice to a boat, sharing strange stories of people seeing odd things in space like angels, and often going mad upon returning home. They recorded everything, but there was little noise until Apollo 18. During that mission, the airwaves were filled. Deciphering these messages is challenging. The boat sets off, and the woman plays a tape recorded in 1967. It features the voice of a female astronaut returning to Earth in a damaged capsule, seemingly dying. That day, Irina allegedly returned unharmed from space. The woman can also let Joe hear Paul's voice, though everyone says he's dead. Joe refuses to listen. They head back to shore, and Alice secretly calls her father, revealing their location. The woman gives Joe the tapes. Mother and daughter drive to a forest cabin, analyzing everything that happened. Alice plays the 1967 tape again, recognizing Valia's voice from her visions. The woman is in pain and very hot, as heard on the tape. Henry looks into a mirror, calling his twin brother. When Pat appears in the reflection, Henry accuses him of stopping his medication and admits his space experience worsened everything. Joe and Alice continue listening to Valia, who says the world is upside down. Reaching the house, Joe plays a recording of her conversation with Alice before the collision, but the girl suddenly claims it wasn't her, as she doesn't speak Swedish. The action shifts to the ISS on the day of the accident, showing the other side of Schrödinger's cat experiment. Paul conducts a quantum physics experiment while Joe talks to Alice when an alarm sounds. Joe is thrown against the window, hitting her head and losing consciousness. Paul tries to help her, realizing she's dead. Her husband and daughter are informed of her death and fly to Baikonur. On the orbit, Paul stays to repair the shuttle, worried that accessing the laboratory is impossible, leaving the experiment results on the station. Joe's body is moved to the shuttle, but Paul struggles to accept her death's reality. Later, he rests before landing, recording messages. Again, he feels Joe is alive and even asks her not to breathe. He then contacts Houston, reports the body's damage, moves her from the ship to the station section, and locks her there. Preparing for undocking, the system fails. Mission Control reminds him that 2 people are needed to activate the system. Paul, like Joe in another reality, hits the console as a shadow approaches the inner control panel, and the system activates. The shuttle lands safely. Paul's family greets him, but he can't forget what happened, feeling guilty for leaving Joe's body on the ISS. He goes to her tree, laying flowers, and suddenly sees Joe before him. They stare at each other for a moment, then she vanishes. Later, Paul tells Joe's family how she died when he sees his portrait in a mourning frame. He's distracted by a question about visiting a psychologist and snaps back to reality. Later, the astronaut appears before the commission and recounts the experiment and the accident. Suddenly, the crew members object. They know nothing about a quantum physics experiment. That project was closed 12 years ago, and the order to leave Joe's body in orbit, it was his decision, not an order he received. Meanwhile, Alice is deeply affected by her mother's loss, constantly feeling that something is off. At the same time, Paul reviews footage from the Apollo 18 mission and is surprised to discover that 2 astronauts died during the launch under Henry Calder's command. He goes to his boss, but she only knows Pat Calder. There was no equipment and no Nobel Prize. The Apollo 18 mission was NASA's biggest failure. The man returns to his family and realizes that his wife's name is different from what he remembers. Later, his family goes to Joe's house for a memorial service, but Alice is hiding in the closet again, refusing to come out, convinced that her mother is alive. Seeing his crew, Paul doesn't want to enter the house, but his wife persuades him, though he admits everything feels wrong. Then his daughter brings Alice. He turns his head and sees another Alice screaming about what's happening in the living room. Joe rushes to the sound, seeing Alice from Paul's reality and trying to call out to her mother. Magnus takes his daughter away, and she asks to be taken to her mother's cabin. The next day, Magnus and Alice go to the lake house. At night, the father confesses he doesn't understand his daughter, who insists they will see their mother again. Meanwhile, Paul visits the house of Henry's twin brother, Pat, calling him Henry and stating that he conducted experiments under his direction. He wants to know the truth at any cost, but Pat pulls out a gun and shoots him. Alice sees a car approaching the cabin, and Joe gets out. And then everything gets confusing, so friends, forgive me if something is unclear. The girl hurriedly puts on her shoes and goes outside, but it's empty in front of the house. She calls for her mother, and Joe, in another reality, from the beginning of the film, turns at her voice but doesn't see her daughter. Alice returns to the house, puts on a coat, and goes out into the night with a flashlight. Joe distinctly hears footsteps passing by, but sees no one. They wander around the same place, shouting, hearing voices, but not seeing each other. In her reality, Joe and Alice sit in the cabin, listening to space recordings again. The girl admits her memories are different. Firstly, she doesn't speak Swedish. Also, her mother said Paul conducts experiments in the lab. The problem is the mother remembers nothing about this lab. She explains that the merging of two different realities is the result of a quantum experiment aiming to capture superposition, the moment when one thing exists in different places simultaneously. The girl suddenly confesses she feels Joe isn't her mother. Meanwhile, in another world, Magnus, accompanied by Henry and the police, heads to the lake house to retrieve Alice. Joe, stepping out to check the device, hears Alice's scream from the snowy field again. But her Alice is sleeping in the cabin. Joe runs outside again, heading towards the scream. At this time, parallel Alice finds a similar cabin, but it's cold and empty. Despite the building's similarities, the girl finds many discrepancies. For example, the picture on the wall is different. She goes upstairs and finds a closet. Hanging her necklace on the handle, Alice climbs inside. But the door suddenly slams shut, and the girl starts banging and calling for help. Joe, wandering through the field, also sees this cabin. She rushes to the banging and finds Alice. Joe carries the girl to her cabin, puts her in a hot bath, and admits that Alice smells like herself again. Stepping aside, Joe finds herself between two worlds, with Alice standing by the bed in one, and the girl sitting in the bath in the other. Suddenly, the second Alice stops seeing Joe, gets out of the bath, and calls for her mother. But Magnus wakes up and runs to her. Alice admits she saw her mother, but now she's gone again. Joe, meanwhile, orders the second girl to get dressed and takes her to find the second cabin and the other Alice. Magnus's car is stopped by a blocked road, but the police inform him that a bulldozer is on the way. Alice asks her mother to come back, and Joe admits she doesn't belong to this world, urging them to figure out where the Joe from this reality went. Alice runs away, accusing her mother of madness. The second Alice goes to find the second cabin. Magnus follows her. The girl walks across the field, seeing a bead from her necklace in the snow. She follows the trail and finds a bag with a quantum device. Parallel Alice finds the second cabin. She enters, looks around, and takes an identical tape recorder, climbing into the closet. The second Alice also arrives at this closet and sees the tape recorder inside. The first Alice turns on the recorder and records her voice, calling Alice. The second Alice turns on the tape recorder and hears her own voice asking her to say something. While the girls establish contact, their parents search frantically through the frozen field and house. Joe finally reaches the closet. In her reality, Magnus approaches the same spot. Joe finds the tape recorder and hears the conversation between the two Alices. Magnus sees and hears the same thing. Terrified, he calls emergency services, reporting his daughter is missing at the lake. Joe gets into the car and heads towards the lake, as the kerosene lamp in her cabin falls and sets it on fire. The two Alices, sitting in the closet, look into the mirror and suddenly see each other. They say they are both looking for their mom. One Alice confesses that her mother died. At this moment, Joe notices the fire behind her. She turns the car around. The two Alices compare memories shared by Joe and conclude that their mothers switch places. Meanwhile, on the winter road, Henry Calder admits to Magnus that when he was on the moon, he thought his crew had died. But miraculously, they were alive. After returning to Earth, he started treatment. Rescuers finally arrive at the lake and start searching for Alice. Henry sees the fire blazing. Joe returns to the burning house, but upon entering, she finds no fire. However, the mirror reflects a burning room. Jo goes upstairs and finds her daughter in the closet, witnessing the conversation between the two Alices. Henry finds his quantum device stolen and lost by Jo. Jo hears the voice of the second Alice and sees her in the mirror. The girl asks her to come home, but Jo doesn't know how to do it. However, she promises to figure it out. She realizes the girls are dying, one in the fire, the other from the cold. She pulls the girl out and hands her to Henry, who has just arrived. Then she returns to the fire. Henry lays the girl in the snow and also calls for help, while Jo walks around the burning house. Suddenly, she sees Alice lying in the snow. She tries to revive her, hearing her voice behind. Turning around, she sees the second Alice, who suddenly says she doesn't feel her double. Apparently, the girl died, but Jo continues giving artificial respiration, believing she must save the girl. Suddenly, Magnus's voice calls out from the darkness. Jo tells her daughter to leave. Magnus sees his wife, unable to believe his eyes, and runs to her, finding his daughter. In the parallel reality, Jo revives the second Alice and starts looking for the second Alice. Rescuers grab her, thinking she's crazy. In the other world, Magnus brings Alice into the cabin, admitting he doesn't know what he saw. The injured Alice lies under an IV and suddenly hears a female voice promising to take her to her mom. The girl wakes up, seeing her father, who says Jo left with Irina. In reality, Jo is taken to a psychiatric clinic. Henry finds the tape recorder and listens to his report, discovering his colleagues are alive. He smashes his quantum device, destroying the experiment results. Magnus brings Alice home, and the girl says her mother is dead, her body still in space. Also, there is another Alice. Magnus tries to convince her that mom is alive, just not well right now. Meanwhile, a piano is brought to Jo's room. Henry is arrested for attempting to kill Paul and murdering a journalist on the ship. He requests his DNA be compared to the person who lived where Paul was shot. He's not Pat. The accuser suddenly says both men are actually the same person and shows a book written by Pat. Henry denies writing it, revealing that his so-called twin brother is actually his double from another reality. Later, Henry shows the broken device to Frederick, blaming Jo for damaging expensive equipment. He has long opposed sending women into space, believing their psyche is unstable. That night, Jo regains consciousness and tries to escape the clinic, but the door is locked. In the morning, Irina examines her, finding no mental disorders. Jo claims there was a fire in the cabin, and before that, she saw her real daughter. Irina asks her to play the piano and says her daughter is with her father. Jo is impossible to convince. Then Irina announces that Jo is pregnant. They couldn't give her lithium, as they never prescribe it to pregnant women, so they developed special vitamins for her, which Irina asks her to take. Jo is horrified and refuses. She can't have this child, because then she won't be able to return to her real life. Irina says there's another patient like her in the next room, but she won't be able to see him. Jo suddenly recognizes her as the dried-up mummy in space. She screams the words she heard on the recording, but Irina runs away. She calls Henry and asks for a meeting. Pat Calder is interrogated with a lie detector, denying shooting Paul, though he invented the machine that could cause an accident in space. Jo sits at the piano, but Ilya comes to her. She's very happy to see him, asking him to find out where Henry Calder is. But he suddenly starts convincing her that Jo is experiencing astronaut burnout, which fortunately is treatable. Jo repeats that the ISS collided with Irina's body. In that reality, it wasn't Paul who died, but her. Ilya doesn't believe her, and she asks him to leave. He says goodbye and secretly slips a key to her door, signaling that the room is bugged. Magnus tells the doctor he also saw Jo in the dark. Parallel. Magnus says he wants to get closer to this new Jo. Irina meets with Henry. He recalls her flight when she returned alive and unharmed, but years later he learned that Irina died in a space accident. She convinces him they both survived such accidents but returned, though they always felt another person nearby. Henry suddenly declares he's not Henry. He disappeared and won't return. He's the person who won the Nobel Prize. That night, Jo escapes her room, goes to the next room, and sees two identical old men. She returns to her room. The next day, Paul's daughter discusses a strange feeling with Alice. The girl feels her father's presence. Alice confesses that her mom is also halfway not here. In the parallel reality, Paul's daughter is puzzled by her father's strange behavior, who went to see a crazy old man and got shot. In both realities, Alice finishes talking to her friend and gets out of the closet. One asks her father to take her to mom in the hospital and pulls out a tape recorder. The other packs the deceased Joe's things and also finds a tape recorder. The girls simultaneously turn them on. When Joe in the hospital starts playing, they connect with each other. Later, the second Alice tells her father there's another Alice and promises she won't search for mom anymore. The prosecutor reports the complete identity of all tests, confirming that Pat and Henry are the same person, and presses charges. Sometime later, Irina comes to Joe, announcing there's only one person in the next room, the first one in space. She advises Joe to take the pills and return to life. She has a daughter and will have another child. She advises Joe to reconcile and move on. Later, Magnus and Alice arrive at the clinic. The girl talks about the other Alice and also advises her mother to accept what happened. She needs a mother, and Joe needs a daughter. So they will move on. Later, Joe shows Magnus their daughter's drawing, admitting she tries to be rational. She will return home and move on. They will have this child. Irina writes a letter admitting that since her flight, she has hidden the fact that space drives people crazy. She asks everyone who has experienced this to report it to her. At the clinic, Paul regains consciousness, unable to understand what he saw and experienced. Magnus takes Joe home, admitting she doesn't look like his wife. But they love each other and want to be a family. Irina says goodbye to Alice, admitting she has a second name, Valia. Meanwhile, on the orbiting ISS, Joe's mutilated body suddenly comes to life and catches a photo of herself with her daughter. This is where the first season ends.
This is the police. This is the police. The scoops are on their way.
New York, 2022. The mindless activities of humanity have led to environmental pollution and global warming, complicating life for mankind. The polluted atmosphere has destroyed nearly all natural wildlife, leaving people to fend for themselves. Natural foods are scarce, and people survive on concentrates produced by the large corporation, Soylent. Their latest product, Soylent Green, is made from plankton and promises to feed everyone. However, it is currently produced in insufficient quantities. New York police detective Frank Thorne lives with his old friend, former police analyst Solomon Sol Roth, who has an excellent memory and serves as a kind of archive for Thorne. Moreover, he has preserved a police reference library to help his friend with investigations. This day begins with a conversation about a recent murder. Sol grumbles that Thorne expects too much from his notes. This isn't the Congressional Archive. Meanwhile, the power goes out. Sol reminisces about the old days when food was real and electricity worked without interruption. But people ruin nature and now everything is dying. The man sits on a bicycle which generates energy for the apartment, while Thorne heads to work, stepping over the bodies of homeless people sleeping right on the staircase of his building. The streets are clogged with old cars that, due to a lack of fuel, now serve as homes for the poor or as venues for criminal meetings. In one of these cars, a young man named Gilbert receives a metal meat hook and instructions for an upcoming job from a criminal world representative. Meanwhile, in the apartment of the wealthy William Simonson, his girlfriend Shirley plays on a machine gifted to her. She is very pleased with a successful move and thanks her master when the security guard Fielding arrives to remind the girl that it's time to go. The couple heads to a store where the vendor sells them expensive products and shows them an item completely unattainable for ordinary people, a beef tenderloin. At this time, Gilbert uses the hook to infiltrate the residential complex for the privileged and ascends the Simonsons' apartment. Seeing the young man, the wealthy man remains completely calm, making no attempt to flee or call for security. Gilbert apologizes and explains that those who sent him can no longer rely on Simonson's silence. The wealthy man agrees with all his arguments and calmly confirms that what Gilbert is about to do is necessary for God. The young man raises the metal hook and strikes Simonson on the head. Sometime later, Thorne arrives at the deceased's home to investigate the case. He questions the caretaker, who assures him that the cameras malfunctioned, and leads the detective to the apartment where Shirley meets him. Ignoring her, Thorne examines the body of the deceased. Searching the apartment for clues, Thorne finds and consumes whiskey, beef, and other foods unavailable to him. Fielding talks about the shopping trip, and the policeman enjoys washing his hands in clean, warm water. He then collects the found papers, some pleasant items like toiletries, and the food into a separate bag, taken from Simonson's bedroom. Meanwhile, Shirley is distraught, thinking that if she hadn't left, Simonson would still be alive. But Fielding refutes her certainty, saying that she likely would have died too. Later, Thorne interrogates the girl, examining her hands. He doesn't fully believe in her sincerity, but Shirley assures him that she wouldn't risk her job. The fact is, she belongs to this apartment, like furniture. Now she will wait for the new tenant if he wants to keep her. At this time, Thorne is informed about the arrival of the sanitation crew. He orders them to take Simonson to the dump, but the crew reports that the wealthy man will be sent to the incineration plant. Shirley is saddened by this outcome, as she still remembers her grandmother's proper funeral. Thorne takes the bag of items and leaves. He returns to the apartment, stepping over the bodies of the homeless, and hands Saul gifts he hasn't seen in a long time: clean paper, soap, and pencils. He also lays out a classified Soylent report related to oceanography found in the deceased's apartment. Saul is overjoyed to see vegetables and cries at the sight of meat. The next day, Thorne goes to work. His boss, Lieutenant Hatcher, is unhappy that the case is still unsolved, but the policeman is convinced that the murder was a contract killing. Nothing was stolen from the apartment, there was no security, and the killer used a meat hook instead of a weapon to simulate a simple robbery. Therefore, the first thing the detective decides to do is check the bodyguard, and after tracking the man, he finds his girlfriend, Marta's apartment. Thorne searches the place, notices a spoon on the table stained with strawberry jam, and concludes that this is too luxurious an item for the bodyguard's girlfriend. Returning home, he sits down for dinner, prepared by Saul from the products he brought the day before. The friends savor long-forgotten tastes, and then Saul gets to the report. Studying the books brought by Thorne, he learned about Simonson's biography and his longtime partner Santini, who now serves as the governor of New York. Together they created the Soylent Project, which became very profitable for its developers. Thorne goes to the phone booth on the corner and reports to the lieutenant what he has learned, unaware that the person who gave Gilbert the meat hook is in his office. Meanwhile, a party is taking place in Simonson's apartment, organized by Shirley. Thorne arrives and demands answers to his questions. Shirley can't say anything specific, as Simonson didn't confide in her. However, she does know Santini. Simonson introduced her to him. In fact, Simonson had been acting strangely in recent months, worried and even visiting church. The couple retreats to the bedroom when the building manager bursts into the hall. He behaves very rudely with the girls, and Thorne declares that he asked them to gather to ask questions. The manager is forced to back off, but the upset girls leave. Shirley offers Thorne to stay the night, take a real bath, and enjoy breakfast. She doesn't like being alone and is happy with the man she likes, as the others don't ask her opinion. Thorne agrees to the invitation. The couple takes a shower together, enjoying amenities unavailable to ordinary mortals. Later, Thorne visits the church where the deceased wealthy man had gone. On the porch, he finds a dead woman with a child tied to her hand. Realizing that the mother can no longer care for her daughter, he takes the child and carries her into the church, but the building is crowded with people who have nowhere else to go. Finding the priest to whom Simonson confessed, Thorne tries to question him. However, exhausted by the huge, sick, and hungry flock, the priest only remembers the fact of the wealthy man's confession, not its details. Yet, under pressure from the policeman, he admits that the truth is killing him. It's so monstrous. Thorne returns to the lieutenant, who informs him that the Simonson case is closed, as it's a simple robbery. He asks to rewrite the report, but Thorne refuses to do so, finding everything too suspicious. For refusing to obey, Hatcher assigns Thorne to patrol the streets. That same day, Governor Santini is informed about the persistent policeman who refuses to close the case. Learning about Thorne's visit to the priest, Santini orders his elimination. Fielding goes to confession. Meanwhile, Thorne is patrolling the street where the Soylent distribution center is located. A large crowd gathers, and soon the product runs out, causing discontent among the crowd. The police recognize the danger and try to quell the unrest. However, people start rioting. The killer sent after Thorne tries to get close to him as machines with scoops arrive to load people into the truck beds and take them for processing. The killer shoots but misses, killing a woman standing next to the policeman. The crowd goes wild. The killer tries to reach Thorne, injuring several rioters and wounding the policeman in the leg. Thorne tries to capture him, but seeing the weapon, pushes the guy. He flies straight under the scoop of a machine and dies, depriving the policeman of the opportunity to question him and learn the truth. Nevertheless, convinced of Fielding's involvement in the conspiracy against him, Thorne sets up an ambush in the bodyguard's girlfriend Marta's apartment. The men fight, during which Thorne accuses the bodyguard of killing his boss and implicating the corporation in the attack on the policeman. Finally, he warns the man to stop following him, otherwise it will end very badly. After this, Thorne goes to Shirley. At this time, Solomon brings the oceanographic report to a group of scientists who call themselves the Investigators Bureau. Shirley has just finished bandaging Thorne and offers to go somewhere, but he doesn't know where they could run. Everywhere it's the same: hunger and a dying earth. The girl is upset as the new tenant is arriving today, but the policeman is sure she will please him. Meanwhile, the scientists announce the results of their research to Saul, and it is truly horrifying. Simonson, being a member of the Soylent Board, learned everything, and his psyche couldn't handle it. The corporation realized they couldn't rely on him. To prevent him from talking, they eliminated him. Now, before going to the Supreme Council, they need to gather evidence. Saul is so shocked by the discovery that he decides to go to the place where they will help him die. Meanwhile, a new owner moves into Simonson's apartment. He meets Shirley and finds her attractive. That evening, Saul goes to the place, notifying Thorne in a note. The policeman immediately rushes to his friend. Saul is just answering the manager's questions. His favorite color is orange, and his favorite music is classical. The man is escorted to a private room where two young people help the old man undress. He is laid on a couch, classical music begins to play, and scenes of nature that no longer exist. Vanished forests, extinct wild animals, lost rivers, and the beauty of the ocean appear on a huge screen. At this time, Thorne arrives at the house of the Lord, and they guide him to Saul's room, but the doors are already closed, and entering is impossible. The detective can only watch his friend's last moments through a viewing window. He watches the beautiful scenes with Saul, marveling at the lost beauty of nature. But Saul notices him and is happy to be able to say goodbye to his friend. Before dying, he tells him about his discovery and begs his friend to find the evidence and reveal the truth. After waiting for the end, Thorne follows the stretcher, carrying his friend's body. The man manages to sneak into the basement, where the bodies are loaded into large trucks, and he climbs onto one of them. Soon the truck arrives at the center for processing human bodies, and Thorne watches as the bags are unloaded and sent inside the factories. The man goes inside and soon finds a conveyor belt that lowers the bodies to a lower level. Thorne follows them, and after tracking the process, the man realizes that Soylent Green is made from processed human bodies. However, the guards spot him, and the policeman has to flee, killing several guards trying to detain him along the way. He soon reaches the city and tries to contact his precinct, but the line is busy. Then Thorne calls Shirley's apartment and asks the girl to stay with the new tenant and just live. Finally, Hatcher responds, annoyed by his subordinate's actions, but Thorne doesn't have time to say anything before he is attacked by the corporation's men, led by Fielding. The man fires back and runs to the church, though he is wounded. However, Fielding rushes after him. He searches for the policeman among the people filling the church, notices blood drops, and follows them, but Thorne attacks first. A fight ensues, people wake up and scream, but the policeman manages to kill his enemy with a knife picked up from the floor. At this moment, Hatcher arrives. Thorne tells him what he has learned and urges him to tell the Bureau members that the ocean is dying, and the plankton from which everyone thinks Soylent Green is made no longer exists. Soylent Green is made from people. So the corporation is intentionally breeding people like livestock. The lieutenant promises to take the necessary measures. Thorne is taken away by paramedics, but the man continues to shout that Soylent is made from people and asks the lieutenant to stop it. The final scenes replay the images shown to the dying Solomon Roth. The adaptation of Harry Harrison's novel turned out to be terrifyingly beautiful and compelling. The most frightening thing is that there is no resolution, nor can there be. Even if people learn the truth, what will change? And the focus of the plot on ordinary people conveys the fragility and insignificance of human lives, which remains unchanged throughout all times. A young man returns home and discovers on the carpet in the living room his own body. Next to it lies an envelope with the inscription, "Look at me." The initial shock is replaced by curiosity as Alex finds a flash drive in the envelope, which he immediately plugs into his computer and on the screen sees just himself. The second, Alex reassures himself he is not high and has not gone insane and advises to listen carefully. Thus, it all started with men in black coming to his house. Rebecca, an employee of a private scientific research institute of advanced technologies which cooperates with the National Security Agency of the USA, has a very tempting offer for Alex. But first, Alex must sign non-disclosure agreement, for which Rebecca offers a check for a substantial amount. Having signed the papers, Alex learns the story of an American unregistered satellite which the USA did not launch. Strangely enough to admit, the satellite is allegedly from the future and contains a coded message inside. If Alex agrees, he will be put to sleep and delivered to the laboratory. The institute knows that he is practically bankrupt and lives in a house inherited from his parents. To prove the seriousness of her intentions, Rebecca immediately transfers a large sum to Alex's account, which convinces him to sign the documents. The next day, he is put in a car, given an injection, after which he falls asleep and only comes to his senses in a closed, secret place. Rebecca shows him the laboratory where the satellite is already located. And the guy starts solving the task. 5 weeks pass, but there are no results yet. Rebecca suggests Alex take a day off, but the guy does not need it. One day he is visited by a vision in which a young woman decodes the same task. After that, Alex bleeds from his nose. Later he finds the name of this woman written on the frame of the bed. Soon, Alex manages to decrypt part of the code, which contains drawings of an unknown device. Rebecca announces the end of his work and informs him that he will be taken home. Alex comes to his senses at home late at night. He feels ill, which he attributes to fatigue and stress. But after a few days, the malaise intensified, and he began to be haunted by persistent hallucinations. And one day, 2 strange-looking men appear on the threshold of his house, wanting to know why he agreed to decrypt the code. Alex does not understand because decryption is just his job, which pays well. The men continue to press Alex with questions about morality. Don't the consequences of his work bother him, since the device to be created from the decrypted drawings will be the most powerful weapon in the world? Alex's head starts to hurt, and he asks the men to leave. They thank him for the answers and leave. Alex immediately feels better and sits down at the computer, but at that moment, a call comes from Rebecca, reminding him of the signed non-disclosure agreements. An indignant Alex realizes that the institute is watching him, and when he again sits down at the computer in his house, the lights go out. Alex goes outside and suddenly sees one of the 2 men who came to him with questions on the opposite side of the street, but the man's body starts growing before his eyes. Frightened, Alex runs home and looks out the window to see the giant's hand reaching for his window. Alex extends his hand to meet it, and morning comes. Rebecca, who has arrived, finds Alex at work. He tries to explain that humanity lives in 2-dimensional space, and his recent guests are a highly developed civilization that exists not only in space but also in time. They can be in this room but earlier or later, and they can watch what is happening through some kind of window in time. Alex tries to convey to Rebecca the danger of the device they are building, which can start World War III. Then the woman informs him that she knows about his illness, a brain tumor. The guy blames the institute, which placed him in a room with a radioactive satellite, causing a tumor to develop in his brain, and insists on stopping the construction of the device. Alex, in the present, pulls his dead body out of the house and buries it in the forest, then returns to the computer and continues to listen to the story from his future self. Alex, in the future, regrets that they did not want to listen to him because he understood that something ominous was coming. Then he remembers the woman. She is cryptographer. Alex finds her address, but Beth refuses to talk to him. Alex shouts that he is dying. He has 6 months left. After that, Beth opens the doors and informs that she has 2 years left. She also realized that it was a weapon, and the drawing supposedly came from the future. There is another person, Schieferman, who communicates with her through the computer and sends her tasks, which she solves when she feels normal. Beth starts feeling unwell, so a man takes her to the bedroom, while he goes downstairs, where it seems like he sees the girl's life in the mirrors. There she is, saying goodbye to her beloved in military uniform. There his comrades inform her of terrible news, and there she is with a handful of pills in her hand, trying to leave this life. But then his attention is captured by a message from Schieferman appearing on the computer monitor. Alex responds, but Schieferman quickly realizes that it's not Beth, and disconnects. The man then grabs a pack of printed papers with tasks previously given by Schieferman. In the morning, Beth finds him on her sofa, with the papers glued together. The guy points out to her that all this are pieces of a puzzle which, when assembled, can give an answer. Schieferman clearly doesn't work at the institute. Alex asks Beth to help stop the creation of a death machine. The girl reports that she fell ill specifically after working with the satellite. She started having hallucinations and began thinking about a message from the future. What if it's possible to contact the sender? She began to hear the voices of the dead and one day heard her own voice. She also saw aliens, though she doesn't believe in them, and asks Alex to leave. Alex goes home, where people in black are waiting for him. Rebecca orders him not to meet with Beth anymore and urges him to use the remaining time wisely. Angered, the guy sends the guests to hell and upon entering the house discovers that all his papers with conclusions have disappeared. Meanwhile, Beth sees a bright light at her house, which makes her feel sick. The woman screams in fear and tries to hide. Alex tries to drown his thoughts in alcohol when a message from Schefferman arrives on his computer. The guy is sure that Rebecca is hiding behind this nickname, but the interlocutor denies it. At that moment, the doorbell rings. Beth is on the threshold. It turns out that Schefferman directed Beth here and sent her the blueprints of a device capable of destroying the technology from the future. The couple begins developing a virus capable of destroying the machine being created from the blueprints they decrypted through the computer. But the next morning, Rebecca bursts into Alex's house. Representatives of the Institute know about their work and are already on their way there. She gives the name of the Institute's founder and orders to go to him as soon as possible. She is Schefferman and hope to destroy the device with their help. Then cars approach Alex's house. The couple escapes through the back exit. Rebecca is caught, given an injection, and thrown into a car. Meanwhile, all the gas burners in the kitchen are opened. In the evening, Alex and Beth arrive at scientist Miles, who immediately recognizes both of them, as he has always followed their work. The thing is, this satellite was not the only one. There was another, which orbited Earth for about 400 years. Apparently, unknown beings from the future were waiting for Earthlings to grow up, fly into space, and be able to decrypt their message. The ancient satellite also contained blueprints of a machine whose purpose was to limit the evolution of humanity within the third dimension. But when Miles announced his discovery, he was laughed at. He also developed a tumor, luckily not fatal. He is sure that aliens are capable of existing in several dimensions. They do not perceive time in a linear form as humans do. And the second device, which is now being created at the Institute, will likely provide them access to the human dimension. So far, they are like watching a videotape where humans are movie characters. With the help of the first device, they can watch this movie but cannot change what is happening. But the second will allow changing the existing reality. Miles is just beginning to understand the essence of this process, but cannot explain everything completely. After all, even the appearance of the aliens is formed by the human brain itself. And by the way, he has been in contact with a huge alien visible only to him, living in his garden for more than 30 years. Miles constantly looks at it, causing his brain to adapt and begin to see the true appearance of the humanoid. But his guests see no one. Miles is sure that the tumor in their heads is the aliens' help so that people could perceive their reality. Alex suggests simply smashing the device with a hammer, but where is the guarantee that they will not restore it in the Institute? So all data on the server needs to be erased, although no one even knows the location of the Institute. But Miles reminds that he is one of its founders, and he pulls out a map with a detailed plan of the Institute. At that moment, a loud bang is heard at the door. The couple runs away, while Miles tries to calm down the raging alien. Alex and Beth hit the road and soon find the Institute's building, where they open a hatch through which they sneak inside. There they separate to increase the chances of finding the laboratory. Alex witnesses the strange behavior of a guard who constantly returns backward and realizes that time inside the Institute is looped. Beth also falls into this loop. Realizing the futility of her attempts to go further, the girl activates the bomb. But because of the time loop, she is unable to leave the dangerous place. Alex goes into a dark room and tries to carry the bomb further when he is overtaken by an alien and literally disintegrates the man into small particles. A minute later, Alex finds himself tied to a table. Opposite him sits a humanoid. Alex thinks he has died, but the alien denies his belief. They are simply curious about the human appearance and their experience of time. Linear time for aliens is incomprehensible and tedious, a labor-intensive cycle of empty beliefs. Humans are like in a trap, forced to constantly go through the same thing. Aliens, on the other hand, exist outside of time and space. They are in every moment. Therefore, causal connection and sequence of actions for them is a mystery. What will happen if a human no longer has to wait for something? Alex realizes humans will become similar to the appearance of aliens, but the familiar personality, the ego, dies in the moment. The alien is surprised. Death is natural, but man hides and distances himself from it. Time determines everything for a human. It is both a giver and a thief. A human sees the world as he imagined it, and what will happen when the source of projection disappears. Even with the eternity of self-analysis, man will not understand the difference between reality and illusion. With each newly born, a new reality comes. Therefore, a person always stands before choice. Alex feels very bad, and then the alien offers to return to the moment before the guy got sick, with the information he now has. Alex decides that he would not have gone to work at the institute and would have stopped all this. The alien is surprised. Why would he change his behavior if he's not able to change the situation? And then Alex admits, people do not choose what will happen. The humanoid insists, will his return to the past make a difference? Can something change? And immediately, the guy finds himself in his home, in front of the computer. He records this flash drive, realizing that nothing can be changed. The world may disappear tomorrow, but this is not news. Everything has already happened. Everything ended before it began. He puts the flash drive in an envelope and falls to the floor. The last words on the flash drive are about Alex in the past, warning Beth, and he drives to the girl's house, while Alex from the future, in his last words, asks to forget about everything and live on. Quite an interesting movie that makes you think, what if the concept of time really does not exist, and we live only here and now in one single moment? Who made us believe that there is a past and a future? And is it true that a person does foolish things, not thinking about how his thoughts and actions change his own future? Friends, write your opinion in the comments. A spacecraft is departing from Earth with another group of settlers headed for Mars. One of the passengers convinces her daughter to wave goodbye to the planet as they will be apart for a very long time. The well-established route consists of 2 stages. The shuttle docks with the Aniara, a huge spaceship that has everything for comfortable living. And after 3 weeks, it delivers the passengers to the colonized planet. A young woman named Emily Grant on the ship serves as a Mimarobe, a guide to the world of Mima, the system that allows one to delve into their memories and visions so that the brain does not get bored with the repetitive space scenery. Emily herself loves to remember her walks in the forest, and the visions even allow her to feel her bare feet stepping on the moss. A new neighbor is added to Emily's room, an adult female astronomer. From the huge monitors, the astronomer tells the passengers about the delights of Aniara and that the ship has everything to keep from getting bored: shopping centers, restaurants, and even nightclubs. If desired during the journey, one can work in the water purification department or the seaweed factory, which is necessary for oxygen production. The company pays points which serve as currency for this work. Emily gathers another group for Mima sessions. In the visualization room, there is silence as the Mimarobe lays people down on the floor, face down on a special pillow, and launches the system. The glowing screen shimmers with different colors, not showing any pictures. But if the Mimarobe needs to know the visions of a specific visitor, she uses a special remote control. Suddenly, an emergency situation occurs on the ship, and the whole group slides to the corner of the room. The passengers exit their cabins in panic to find out what happened. They gather in a large hall where the captain is supposed to make a live broadcast. After gathering his strength, the man makes an announcement. There has been a system failure on the Aniara, and the ship has lost all fuel and drifted off course. The crew believes that it's not a big deal and that by using the gravity of celestial bodies, they will be able to return to Earth. However, the journey will now take a little over 2 years instead of the promised 3 weeks. The outraged passengers disagree with this plan, worrying about their plans without even realizing what lies ahead. Austerity measures are introduced on the ship, but the crew realizes that the supplies will not be enough in any case. At best, there is only enough food for a couple of months. One of the crew members suggests growing algae more actively, which will help them survive. The first 3 weeks of confinement in space pass. The people still don't lose their optimism, but they're already starting to get bored. The Mima becomes the most popular hole as everyone wants to see more than just the infinite universe outside the window, and Emily can't handle it, so she asks the captain for help. In addition, the girl is going through a personal drama, hoping to resume her relationship with one of the crew members, Isabel. Emily asks her neighbor how long it would take to reach the nearest celestial body so that the ship can turn around. The woman initially avoids answering, but then admits that in her opinion all of this is hopeless. There are no points that could help them. The crew just doesn't know how to tell the passengers about it. After hearing this, the Mimirobe has a panic attack and runs to her hole to immerse herself in memories of Earth, and also to drink in secret so that the commander would know. That journey has been going on for 3 years already. The people have settled into life on the ship, having come to terms with the length of the flight. Emily goes to a party where she meets Daisy and they decide to alleviate their loneliness together. When the couple retreats to a corridor, Isabel walks by and gives Daisy a cold glance, making it impossible for her to relax. There aren't enough people on the ship to work with the algae and water purification systems. Even young passengers are now being recruited, but the systems can't keep up, and all the drinks have an unpleasant sulfide smell. Strange things also start happening in the ship's hull as the system malfunctions, and Mima, using human language, begs to stop as it can no longer handle passing through people's memories. One of the people lying on the floor starts thrashing around in hysteria, and when Emily connects her remote to him, she sees very unpleasant images in his head. The Mimirobe turns to the ship's captain, asking him to let the system rest, but he believes that this is the passenger's only outlet and denies her request. Furthermore, he reprimands the girl for driving customers out of the session. During the next session, Mima repeats its words, and at some point the laser screen begins to crumble, finally stopping the system's operation. The customers are dissatisfied and blame the Mimirobe entirely. The people gather at the door to the hall to hold a memorial for Mima, and the management accuses Emily of what happened. They catch the girl and punish her severely, after which they imprison her along with Isabel, who tried to defend her friend before the management. On the ship, a series of nervous breakdowns with fatal consequences begins, and the commander has no choice but to release everyone who is under guard to take up workstations. Dead bodies are sent into open space as the ship is not equipped to store them. Isabel is sent to work in the logistics department, and Emily returns to teaching, this time with the task of educating the children on board, focusing on space sciences that could help them with their return. During their time in confinement, the Mimirobe and Isabel developed a relationship, so they move in together once they're free. Communities and groups emerge on the ship, each praying in their own way for a return and rescue. At one of the gatherings of a cult-like group, they invite the girls, as Emily was associated with Mima. In a dark room, the friends first become witnesses and then participants in love games, after which Isabel becomes pregnant. The girl falls into depression, fearing that her indulgence will bring another hostage into the situation, but Emily supports her with all her might. She even plans to make a light screen that would replace the dark picture outside the window with earthly landscapes, but the captain forbids wasting resources on such foolishness. The couple has a healthy boy who grows very quickly, but Isabel can't shake the feeling that she shouldn't have done it. While bathing with his son in the pool, she almost commits a terrible act, but fortunately she's distracted by a message from the captain, who urgently invites his former assistant to a meeting. It becomes revealed that after 6 years of travel, a flying machine has finally been detected, and a meeting with it will take place in about a year. Isabel measures the approximate size of the object and understands that it is unlikely to be a rescue ship, but everyone hopes that they will be able to obtain fuel from it to return to their route. Emily comes to the team to be with her girlfriend at such an important moment. The captain joyfully announces the discovery to the passengers, hoping to boost their morale, which he manages to do. To celebrate the occasion, a party is held on the ship, complete with drinks and leftover delicious food. As usual, the commander tries to present himself in the best light by claiming credit for the team's achievements. Throughout the year, everyone diligently trains to release probes and dock, and by the appointed time, everyone is fully prepared for the operation. The docking operation goes perfectly, and the giant space probe is placed in the ship's cargo hold for examination to determine if it contains any fuel and how radioactive it has become during its time in space. The son of Emily and Isabel is growing up, and the couple now has hope that he will see Earth. Due to a lack of peers, the boy is not developing well and hardly speaks. It is not possible to determine the chemical composition of the object because the study methods on the ship are outdated, but work is constantly being done. The captain declares that he does not consider it a mistake to give people hope, as it has brought stability to many. The roommate of Emily gets drunk at the bar and becomes too candid, causing panic to break out on the ship again. The captain takes notice of this and gets rid of the troublemaker at the first opportunity, even sending her body into open space but allowing for a memorial service for Emily. After taking an exhilarating pill, Emily goes to the bar where she meets Daisy and his friends again. The group has a fun time, but another accident occurs on the ship. An unknown object explodes and damages the equipment. Those who were working on the probe in the cargo hold at the time are lost forever. Upon inspection of the damage, the captain orders them to be disposed of while saving any useful clothing. Meanwhile, the Mimorobe returns home and asks Isabel for forgiveness, and it seems that everything is returning to a peaceful state. However, during the conversation, Emily realizes that her friend has developed mental disorders. After putting her son to bed, Emily shares her achievements at work with Isabel. The two women have a nice chat, and Emily is not worried about anything. Wishing her friend a good night, Emily leaves to finally connect the light screen she has long dreamed of creating. Everything works perfectly, and the remaining passengers on the ship marvel at the earthly landscapes with waterfalls and forests outside the window. As she listens to the words of gratitude, Emily plans to create new pictures. Emily runs to her cabin to hear the opinion of her family. She opens the door with the key, but it doesn't budge. Emily tries to fix the lock several times, but then realizes that something is blocking it from the inside. With effort, she finds a belt from a rope on the door handle, and Isabel is nearby. Coming to her senses a few seconds later, Emily runs to her son's room, but there she's met with a terrible sight. It's the 10th year of the journey. The captain gathers the few remaining passengers in the main hold and presents Emily with an award for creating the light screen. As she receives the medal from the commander, the young woman notices traces of a nervous breakdown on his wrist. Giving a speech, the captain tries to appear heroic in this situation and suggested they should be proud that they have gone farther than anyone has gone before. On the 24th year of the journey, only a few people remain alive. Old and wrinkled Emily leads a meeting of the survivors where they pray for strength to be sent to them. The ship has long been powerless and is floating in space like a piece of space junk. And almost 6 million years later, the spacecraft Aniara approaches an unknown planet in the constellation of Lyra. An alien race from the depths of space colonizes Earth. Millions of people from around the world are sent to work in mines on other planets. Those left on Earth are controlled with implanted tracking chips and giant alien robots positioned around the perimeters of cities. Oh wow, you hear me? Ah! Chicago, 2019. The city is under martial law due to a massive alien attack on all major cities of the world. The Drummond family, a father, a mother, and their 2 sons, tries to leave the city, but all exits are blocked. When a police officer stops their car at one of the exits, the father presses the gas pedal and breaks through the blockade. Entering an exit tunnel, the man is forced to stop as the exit is blocked by aliens. Taken by surprise, the father freezes, although his wife asks him to turn around. Suddenly, an unknown pulse tears through both adults sitting in the front seats. The children, looking up, see an incomprehensible creature standing right in front of their car's hood. 9 years later, the world, having surrendered without a fight to the invaders, is completely under their control. The operation of vital productions, including power plants, has been restored everywhere. The aliens are called legislators because all laws and rules now come from them. Over the years since Earth's surrender, the aliens have forced humans to build suitable living spaces for them underground, called closed zones, where only high-ranking human officials are allowed entry. It became clear that the alien invasion aimed at Earth's resources, their extraction, and exportation led to huge social stratification. The rich, working for the aliens, continue to live well, while the poor have lost all guarantees, including education and healthcare. Police lawlessness thrives, and the deportation of all undesirable people from the planet has begun. The alien systems block all communication lines, so people know nothing about the life of other cities and countries. Amidst this wave, a resistance emerged, planning an attack on the closed zone in Chicago. But the plan failed, the zone was unharmed, and the fate of the rebels remains unknown, although the police assure that they were all eliminated. and this was supposed to be the first spark from which a flame would ignite. 9 years after the failed uprising in Chicago, the police monitor anyone who raises even the slightest suspicion. Detective William Mulligan reviews video recordings from Gabriel's apartment, whose brother Rafe died in the uprising and was posthumously named a hero of the resistance. The guy goes through his usual morning routines, then wakes up his girlfriend, showing her a photo taken on the other side of the lake, where visiting is now prohibited. But the girl does not want to believe in a change in their lives and asks not to invent the impossible. Gabe leaves the house where his friend, who has obtained and repaired a boat, is already waiting for him so they can sail out of the city tonight. But Gabe reminds him that he is under round-the-clock surveillance. Meanwhile, Mulligan reviews the newspapers and sees an advertisement for the Phoenix fire suppression system, after which he goes to his old friend Jane, who now runs a brothel. At the entrance, he sees the Phoenix emblem on the wall and notices the police chief. The owner greets Mulligan as a good friend and hands him a gift box, mentioning the Donnans and their gifts. Returning to the police station, he shares his findings. Phoenix exists and is preparing something for the New World Masters, but his partner does not believe that anyone could have survived the last purge. At this time in the subway, two resistance members meet because the newspaper advertisement is a battle readiness order given by their leader, whom they call First. He has learned that there is an entrance to the zone through the stadium, and soon there will be a unity festival, which high-ranking aliens will attend. The only thing left is to infiltrate. The next day, Gabe goes to work, having passed through the recognition system, since every person now has an identifier chip inside. The guy works in a data restoration center where he views millions of private videos a day and checks browser history requests. He sends all the collected information to the Central Information Center and destroys the carriers. Later, he receives a cigarette containing an unknown substance from his colleague and hides it behind his ear. After work, Gabe exits to the outside with a crowd of other workers and sees arriving guards grab and lead away one of the women. At the same time, an alien transport ship is sending off another batch of people as slaves for the alien mines from Earth. And around the perimeter of the city stand giant alien robots to prevent people from escaping. Gabe goes to the boat but is horrified at the sight of the weapon in his friend's hands. If they get caught, they will be instantly destroyed. Their scuffle is interrupted by the appearance of Mulligan, who orders Gabe to get into his car. He reminds the boy that he was his father's partner and now asks not to repeat his brother's mistakes and make the right choice. Gabriel has no information about Phoenix, and he does not intend to snitch, so the conversation goes nowhere. Gabriel goes to the person he is supposed to sell the acquired cigarette to, but the potential client pushes the boy into his van and, putting on them special collars that jam the tracking chip signal, drives him to the center of a destroyed district, where in one of the surviving buildings, Gabe meets his living brother. After a joyful reunion, Rafe tells him that he is the only survivor from his group. Unknown to him, Craftsman removed his chip, and now he has joined a new group. He takes the cigarette and, giving his brother a large sum of money, orders him to leave the area because Phoenix plans to attack the invaders. The brothers argue about the necessity of the uprising, but Rafe is sure that as long as there is time to fight, they should fight. Gabriel then rushes into his apartment and hurriedly starts packing, convincing his girlfriend to join him. The girl tries to persuade the boy to stay, and seeing the money and learning that Rafe is alive, asks the boy to think carefully, as they could then be recorded as accomplices. The couple argues, unaware that the police are closely listening to their conversation. Gabe leaves alone, but immediately encounters Mulligan, who was following him. Gabriel runs away from Mulligan and hides in the secret passages underground. He puts on the remaining collar, and the aliens' drones do not lose sight of him. Mulligan returns to the station, where he has an entire room dedicated to Phoenix, and notes that Rafe might be alive. At this time, Rafe's carrier pigeon reaches the recipient, and the information is passed along the chain to a secret IP center, where upon entering the received numbers, its worker displays Phoenix's target, an official who will gain access to the closed zone that day. The newspapers immediately publish Phoenix's announcement, and the group members receive the call. One of them, working on the radio, plays a conditional track heard by a man with a dog, who immediately takes her for a walk. Her bark is heard by a mechanic girl who rushes to her car. Later they arrive at an underground clinic where a doctor performs complex operations to remove the tracking chips. Then, he hands over the chips extracted from law-abiding citizens previously deceased from diseases, as well as special containers that need to be kept in the mouth, so they too will be recognized as law-abiding citizens. Meanwhile, one of the resistance members, serving as a priest, meets with Rafe. The pair goes to an arms dealer and receives invisible explosive material from a girl extracted from a crashed alien ship. If attached to an organic carrier's skin or hair, scanners will not be able to detect it. Later, the resistance group gathers together. The leader distributes containers with new chips and shows a photo of the person who will go to the aliens. Lastly, he hands out poison capsules to everyone, which will help avoid being captured alive by the enemy. The group freely enters the festival and attaches the invisible alien explosive device to an official. He goes to the arriving aliens and explodes with them. The city is immediately locked down, and the police block the streets to find the attackers. The priest is the first to die, caught in gunfire. Rafe is caught by one of the aliens and tries to escape from it, hiding in a van. This is seen by the guy's comrades, who come to his rescue and destroy the alien. The surviving rebels try to escape from the city, while the aliens bring in hunter warriors from another world, and they quickly track down Rafe and his accomplices. Enraged, the legislators prepare to destroy the district where, according to their information, the resistance is based. Mulligan tries to persuade the police chief, who is heading to report to the aliens, not to allow this because he needs time to catch the suspects. But he is reminded that the decision is made and his search interests no one. Raids begin in the city, during one of which Gabe is captured, while his brother and two of his comrades reach the station and board buses 2 minutes before the expiration of the chips from law-abiding citizens. But when it seems they have managed to escape, the buses are stopped by the hunters. Realizing his capture is inevitable, one of the group takes the poison capsule. The mechanic girl attacks a hunter and is instantly vaporized. Rafe tries to run but is captured and brought to the police, where his brother is being interrogated at the same time. Mulligan shows him how Rafe is tortured to make him talk about Phoenix and give up first. Gabe learns that the city is preparing for destruction and agrees to send a message to the leader. He is brought to the surviving members of the resistance, and hearing that the guy allegedly knows ways into the zone, they agree to connect him with first. Gabe is brought to Jane Doe, who is number 1 in the leader of the resistance in the city. Upon seeing the boy, the woman calls him by name, which confuses Gabrielle, and at that moment, a police squad raids the brothel and kills Jane. The investigation reveals that Jane had installed listening devices to record conversations with police officers she served to gather secret information. Later, during a briefing with the aliens, Mulligan names the members of Phoenix who, learning about the death of First, voluntarily left this life. Before the invasion, Jane was a history teacher and changed her profession to gather secret information. Mulligan presents recordings obtained in the brothel, where it is heard that the police chief actively leaked secret information about the aliens. Captured resistance members are deported to alien mines, and Mulligan, having declared the neutralization of the Chicago threat, is appointed acting commissioner. Later, he meets with Gabe and puzzles the boy with a new thought. What if the failure of the uprising was planned? And he hands the boy a memory card, extracted from a phone once given to him by Jane. The next day, Gabe views its contents, a video dedicated to a party before his birth, where close family friends record messages for him. There, he sees both Mulligan and Jane Doe, who was acquainted with his mother, as well as some other members of Phoenix. Meanwhile, Mulligan is allowed to arrive at the Earth Control Center and meet with the legislators in their habitat. As he heads to the spaceship, the same invisible substance that was part of the explosive used in the stadium attack manifests on him, explaining that Mulligan is also part of the resistance, and the plan was organized so that he could infiltrate the main alien base and set off an explosion. During the credits, a map shows that the plan worked, and the city blockades were successfully lifted, after which many resistance foci flared up everywhere. This means that the plan to light a match and ignite a bonfire was a success, and humanity begins an active fight against the alien oppressors. Despite the film being labeled as science fiction, the message here is quite realistic. How will humanity behave when it realizes the possibility of its total occupation? Also, the filmmakers draw belief in victory from the history of humanity, using Lenin's motto, "A spark will kindle a flame." The struggle, the underground conspiracy. The film is full of revolutionary stylistics, and it watches like a real political thriller. The movie begins in Leningrad in 1940. A young woman named Anya works as a seamstress in a factory where a young machinist, Vasily, who is very serious, notices her and even asks her to introduce him to her only relative, her brother Peter. However, Anya asks for a little more time, and the young man agrees to wait until the next day. But as the girl leaves for her lunch break, he quietly follows her, admiring her. Anya walks down the street, looking at a dirigible hovering above, from which German journalists are filming the city below. At this moment, a tram driven by Peter pulls up to an intersection. Suddenly, Anya realizes that a fast-moving truck is about to crash into the tram, and her brother will likely perish. Frozen in fear, she suddenly emits light waves that lift the truck into the air and throw it away from the intersection. The tram's windows shatter, injuring people, but a major accident is averted. This entire incident is captured on film by the journalists in the dirigible. As the shocked people try to recover, Peter jumps out of the tram, grabs Anya, and quickly takes her away. The girl regains consciousness in their shared room. Peter packs their belongings, urging his sister to flee Leningrad, although she is reluctant since they have already had to move several times due to her supernatural abilities manifesting at the most inappropriate times and attracting the attention of the authorities. Peter asks her to control her powers, but Anya is unable to master them as they are beyond her control. At that moment, representatives of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs burst into the room and arrest the siblings. An investigator named Ivan arrives at the scene. He interviews the victims, and one of the women recalls the strange girl standing at the crossroad. Back at the office, Ivan begins interrogating Anya, but she cannot provide any concrete information. She insists it was just an unfortunate accident, and then Ivan shows her photos from their previous residences where strange incidents and destruction occurred, prompting the siblings to move hastily. The investigator is willing to believe she is not a criminal, especially since he has also witnessed something very strange in his life. However, Ivan is unable to elaborate as his superior, Petrov, who turns out to be his father-in-law, takes Anya and leads her to the secret facilities managed by Professor Ilinsky. The scientist welcomes the girl, explaining that she is special and now they will study her abilities. However, Anya refuses to cooperate until she sees her brother, and Ilinsky promises to arrange a meeting for them. Meanwhile, Ivan cannot calm down, although Petrov, who is also his father-in-law, demands he forget the incident and focus on other matters. He had already barely managed to suppress his absurd report about an incident in Madrid. Returning home, Ivan tries to tell everything to his wife Vera, but she asks him to take a vacation and forget everything that happened. The action shifts to 1936. A group of Soviet soldiers, including Ivan, engages in battle with Spanish fascists in Madrid. Suddenly, a man in a strict coat and hat, wearing a strange mask, appears before them. Looking at the soldiers, he utters something incomprehensible, after which Ivan's comrades start shooting themselves one by one. Only Ivan finds the strength to shoot at the man in the mask. The man quickly disappears, leaving Ivan amidst his fallen comrades. The year is 1940. A man in a mask named Neumann and his assistant Katerina arrive in Munich, where the woman meets a Jewish boy named Baruch on the street, who plays chess brilliantly. She offers him a ride with them, noting he can always leave if he does not like their school. An orphan agrees and gets into the car, where Neumann utters several hissing words, causing Baruch to fall asleep instantly. Neumann agrees that the boy is brilliant, but by no means possesses superpowers. However, Katerina is determined to help the boy. Meanwhile in Moscow, Professor Ilinsky leads Anya to the laboratory where she will be studied, and fulfilling his promise, brings her to a cell to see her brother. Peter again asks her not to show her abilities, and she promises to write to him. Baruch is brought to an ancient castle owned by Neumann. The boy is laid in a hammock in a hall inhabited by many other teenagers, but when the adults leave, he wakes up and is frightened by the dark silhouettes surrounding him. Back in Moscow, Professor Ilinsky leads Anya to a separate room, more like a cell, and locks her in there. He then reports to Petrov that he has never seen anything like it. The girl is a scientific discovery, a unique case, to which the chief objects. She is a new weapon. Later, Anya is subjected to various tests, but she shows nothing special. Ivan cannot forget the incident, studying everything related to the strange explosion. The video footage of the accident also reaches Neumann, and he decides to fly to the USSR. There, the man is taken to meet with Professor Ilinsky. Neumann introduces himself as a worker from the Ahnenerbe organization and immediately determines that the professor is terminally ill. He offers to ease his pain if the professor allows him to speak with Anya. Ilinsky does not believe in his abilities, but Neumann utters something, and glowing waves emanate from him, enveloping the professor, causing him to lose consciousness. Taking advantage of this, Neumann searches his desk and takes some papers. Soon, Ilinsky regains consciousness, but strangely feels no pain. He agrees to arrange a meeting with Anya and leads the German to the laboratory. Neumann approaches the girl and secretly shows her an execution order for her brother. Then waves of unprecedented force begin to emanate from the girl, literally blowing up the entire laboratory. Neumann grabs her and escapes. Ivan sees from the window a man in a hat whom he immediately recognizes and runs to the laboratory where explosions are heard. But Neumann and the girl are nowhere to be found. The narrative shifts to 1924. In a remote Karelian village, a woman lives with two children, Peter and Anya. One day they go with the village boys into the forest. Suddenly a pack of wolves leaps out at the children. The children freeze in fear, but waves emanate from Anya, scattering the beasts. When the men arrive at the clearing, they find the girl dead. 1940. Petrov enters the devastated laboratory, where people connected by tubes into a single organism and marked with the letter M lie in chairs. At first glance, this structure was not damaged by the explosion, as the injured Ilinsky lying nearby confirms. The professor reports that Anya caused all this and refuses to continue the experiments. Then, Petrov shoots him. Afterward, he goes to Ilinsky's colleague, who everyone simply calls Professor Lyubov. Petrov asks her to activate the M squad. Learning about the professor's death, the woman refuses to help Petrov, but he reminds her of her family, and Lyubov reluctantly agrees. On the train, a customs officer searches Neumann's compartment and finds an iron sarcophagus with Anya inside. Unsure of what to do, he goes for help. Meanwhile, Anya envisions her own funeral following the incident with the wolves. Frightened, she comes to, and Neumann informs her that he is saving her. Anya tries to run, but the customs officers, who decided to detain the strange German, stop her. However, he utters something, and the military personnel bring their pistols to their own heads. Neumann and Anya leave. At the same time in Moscow, Petrov reports to his colleagues that a member of the Ahnenerbe, which translates to ancestral heritage, Neumann has stolen a valuable exhibit from the USSR, the girl Anya. A squad has already been formed to pursue the German and will depart in a matter of days. Learning of this, Ivan requests to be included, but Petrov, feeling sorry for his daughter, refuses to do so. Neumann leads Anya to a spot where Katerina's car is waiting, and she drives the pair to the castle. It is apparent that the woman does not like Neumann's new toy, but he immediately says that Anya is just like him. At the castle, they are greeted by children whom Neumann calls his army. Anya is escorted to her room, and Neumann finds a guest in his office, Admiral Canaris, who is very interested in the scientist's research. But today he has come to express his displeasure with Neumann's sabotage in the USSR, as it could start a war. Neumann reassures him and invites him to a formal dinner. Meanwhile, Anya is startled by a sound and sees Baruch in her room, trying to open her window to escape the castle. But Katerina and Neumann appear and stop him. While Katerina takes the boy away, Neumann tries to convince Anya that the castle is a paradise, and no one wants to leave of their own volition. Katerina brings Baruch to a bedroom, reminding him that he must speak only German and not tell anyone his real name if he wants to live. But when she leaves, the other teenagers attack him. In Moscow, Ivan asks his wife to help him get enrolled in the squad, after which he goes to Professor Lyubov. He is interested in whether hypnosis can make a person do what another wants. The professor asks him not to travel to Germany, but he is determined to find the man in the mask. In the castle, Anya finds Baruch hanging. The boy tries to explain that the others hate him and beat him, therefore he wants to run away. But Anya admits that it was the same for her until she became strong, and he can too. Later they find Neumann in the park, who promises Anya he will teach her to control her power. He explains that he inherited the castle from the person who adopted him, and now it serves as a refuge. He has set up Anya's room according to her taste and hopes she will like it here. Grateful, Anya sits down at the sewing machine. unexpectedly remembering how the villagers burned their house, calling her a witch. Then her brother saved her, though their mother died in the fire. Back in Moscow, Petrov enrolls Ivan in the squad and asks the commander to ensure that he does not return. Leningrad, 1937. Returning from Madrid, Ivan writes in his report everything he witnessed, but Petrov does not believe him, noting that if the soldiers shot themselves, they could be declared deserters. Tired of trying to convince the young man, Petrov takes him to Professor Lyubov. 1940. A special forces unit travels to Germany in a grain car. Ivan warns his comrades about Neumann's peculiarities, but it seems they don't quite believe him. At the castle, the children undergo daily training, while Anya enjoys the long-forgotten peace. In the morning, Katerina brings her a box with a new dress sent by Neumann for her to wear at his birthday party. The girl goes out to the hall where the children are preparing decorations for the evening, and then they head to training. Baruch is afraid of heights and falls from a rope ladder, but no one pities him. After that, it's time for shooting practice, but the boy throws his pistol down and runs to the local cemetery where Neumann finds him. Baruch asks to be let go, but the scientist promises to teach him not to be afraid. Meanwhile, Squad M climbs out of the wagon, and Ivan remembers his training in 1936 before being sent to Madrid. Then his comrades met him coldly because he was the boss's son-in-law, but Ivan earned respect through hard work and cleverness. And now he is on a special mission. Suddenly, they are hailed by an old man who turns out to be their liaison and must take them to the castle. At the same time, Petrov is informed that the squad has successfully crossed the border. Guests start arriving at the castle. Neumann welcomes Canaris and escorts him to the hall where music plays, and ladies and gentlemen drink and talk about the beautiful evening. Neumann himself is enchanted by Anya's beauty, and she gives him a hand-embroidered handkerchief she made for him. Later, guests deliver laudatory speeches in honor of the birthday boy, and he invites Anya to dance to the envy of the present ladies. Canaris notices Katerina's displeasure, but the woman remains cold, rejecting his advances. She dislikes Canaris's interest in their wards, and he tells her that people are already coming for Anya from the USSR. Squad M reaches the forest house of their liaison, who supplies them with weapons and draws a path on a map, but then shots ring out. German soldiers have caught up with the saboteurs. A battle ensues and the Russians win. Later, the commander finishes off the wounded enemies and, unexpectedly for Ivan, shoots the liaison, indicating that they have no orders to return. At the castle, Canaris agrees to play chess with Baruch, and the boy wins. The admiral admires his genius, but upon learning that the boy is Jewish, he pulls out a pistol. Anya sees the man aiming at the child, and her powers activate. Guests watch in horror as everything in the hall begins to rise into the air. The admiral himself is lifted up, but at that moment Neumann grabs the girl by the shoulder. She faints, and Canaris falls to the floor. Everything stops immediately, but people scream and scatter. The furious admiral orders all children to be destroyed within 3 days and departs. Neumann escorts Anya to her room and admires her because today she managed to stop. The girl does not understand why it is necessary to destroy the Jews, and Neumann reminds her that no one pitied them either, as they were not like everyone else. The man returns to his office where Katerina awaits him, but he does not accept her attentions because he is seriously captivated by Anya and hopes to succeed with her. However, Katerina is saddened by this turn in their relationship and reminds him of Canaris's order, but Neumann intends to make a profitable deal. The action shifts to Neumann's childhood when children laughed at him and drove him away. His parents were forced to put a mask with a digital lock on him so he couldn't harm anyone, and the boy suffered greatly from this. One day his father complained to the landlord that his son was hindering his ability to fulfill his duties as a tenant, and the man came to see the unusual child. They explained to him that Neumann scared all the guests and caused his father to lose a finger. The year is 1940. The morning after the dinner, Anya goes out to the hall, but the servants who witnessed yesterday's incident look at her warily. Then the girl goes to the park, where she is met by an armed Katerina, but seeing the guards, she returns to the house. Later, Neumann conducts a meditation for the teenagers, asking Thor to give them strength. Anya sees this and asks for permission to start training. Neumann orders Katerina to stay at the castle and wait for guests, and he takes Anya away. Meanwhile, the squad continues to move through the forest. Soon they find a rubber boat at the prearranged place. Neumann puts Anya on his personal plane and takes her to his parents' house. Landing, they walk across a bridge and suddenly Neumann asks the girl to remember her brother. Her powers activate. Water rises up, carrying fish and creating a reverse waterfall. But then the man calls her. Anya comes to her senses and everything returns to normal. However, now she can use her powers when she needs to. Soon they enter an old house and Neumann recalls how he was taken from his father's home. Lastly, his mother writes down the password to his mask on a piece of paper, and little Neumann leaves their lives forever. In the present, he tells that his father was a harsh and cruel man, often beating him and his mother, so he promised himself that his child would never be unhappy. The man remembers how his patron removed his mask and wanted to throw it away, but Neumann did not allow it. The man informed him that he would now take care of him, but he must trust him. Soon they arrived at the castle, where the patron confessed that every person has the right to be happy, and the boy lived for the first time like a normal child. But a year later, war came. His patron went away on business, and their home turned into a hospital. Neumann helped as best he could. Once he had to assist in the amputation of a leg. The soldier was in great pain, and then Neumann activated his powers and relieved the poor man of his suffering during the operation. Later he confessed to one of the nurses that he loved her. The adult woman laughed at the boy but said she loved him too. But one day he caught his nurse with one of the recovering soldiers, and in a fit of rage he made the soldier kill himself with a hammer. They caught him, gagged him, tied him up, and took him away from the castle. In 1940 he tells Anya that his parents died, so he is so happy to have found her. The girl lights candles in the fireplace, using her new powers, which delights Neumann. They drink wine and then become close. At night, Anya dreams where Baruch dies and wakes up terrified. She asks Neumann to return to the castle. Meanwhile, the squad reaches the river. One of the soldiers is wounded and runs out of strength. Then he takes his own life so as not to be a burden to his comrades. Only 3 remain, but they still row towards the castle. And there Katerina, who can't sleep, reminisces about the past when she helped her mother, who worked in a psychiatric hospital, where one day they brought in a tied-up boy named Neumann. She then freed him, and he promised never to harm her. The year is 1936, Leningrad. Petrov attends a lecture by Professor Ilyinsky, where he discusses a significant discovery in the field of controlling human memory and emotions. Ilyinsky's colleague, Professor Lubov, is inspired by the future changes, as people with good mental health will be able to work better and create a brilliant future for themselves and their children. The Project M envisions a new society where happy people with immense productivity and willpower will live. Petrov asks about the use of these discoveries in the military sphere, arguing that if a new society is to be built, it must be able to defend itself. However, Lyubov categorically opposes totalitarianism. After the lecture, Petrov offers Ilyinsky full support for their program if he agrees to operate under military auspices. But Ilyinsky sends him to Lyubov as the ideational inspiration behind the project. However, the woman flatly refuses to cooperate with the military. That same day, she is hit by a car in the street. Later, Petrov returns to Ilyinsky, informing him of the unfortunate accident with his colleague, and Ilyinsky reluctantly agrees to cooperate. Again, 1940-year Germany. The 3 remaining members of the squad reach the castle's territory. Surprised by the lack of security, they enter the premises. Petrov receives a summary of incidents in a specific area of Germany and realizes that everything is going according to plan. His boss is horrified. His people have left a very noticeable trail, which could easily lead to the USSR being accused of provocation. But Petrov assures him that everything was planned this way and there will be no international conflict. At that moment, his daughter calls and he rushes home. The squad members reach the castle and, splitting up, begin to explore the premises. Meanwhile, Petrov finds Vera in a hysterical state. She is going mad with worry for her husband, and the father decides to take action. At the same time in the castle, Katerina reads a book to the children, and seeing her nervousness, they calm the woman. She orders lights out and leaves, just as Ivan enters the hall from the other side. Seeing the children in front of him, the man lowers his weapon and leaves. The children remain motionless. The soldiers continue to explore the castle, and now the squad leader enters the hall with the children. But he does not lower his weapon and prepares to shoot. Then the children attack first. The commander fires in all directions, but the teenagers throw their clothes at him and knock him down. The eldest orders the pistol handed to Baruch to kill the enemy, but the boy cannot shoot the man, and the man manages to wound him with a knife before being killed. The children carry the bleeding Baruch to the bedroom, leaving the soldier's body on the hall floor. The third squad member, a female warrior, finds Katerina's office and engages her in a shootout. Katerina flees, but the woman catches up to her, and they fight. The woman is defeated when Katerina pushes her away. Seeing her opponent unconscious, the German grabs a pistol but doesn't manage to shoot because Ivan appears. Threatening him with a pistol, the woman captures him. In Moscow, Petrov brings his daughter to Professor Lyubov and asks her to erase the girl's memory. Lyubov is outraged by this request, as the love for a husband is the most precious thing in Vera's life. However, under military pressure, she agrees and performs the necessary manipulations, while Petrov's subordinates methodically clear their apartment of photographs and items belonging to Ivan. But one photograph falls under a chest of drawers, and the soldier does not notice it. After the procedure, the girl regains consciousness but does not remember her husband at all. At this time, the teenagers attack Ivan, not noticing Katerina, and wound him in the arm. The woman drives off the aggressive children and escorts the wounded man to Nauman's office, where she admits to Ivan that she recognized him because she had seen him in Madrid. He asked why her master kidnapped Anya. Could it be that he wants to use her in the war? Katerina assures him that he still doesn't understand. People are petty and greedy creatures fighting for power. Neumann is unique. He is ready to seize all power on Earth to save the world from war. Meanwhile, Neumann and Anya arrive at the castle and find a wounded woman on the threshold. The scientist finishes her off with a pistol while Anya runs to the bedroom to the teenagers and finds Baruch dead. At this time, Ivan is bandaging himself while Katerina explains that they teach the children survival by developing their skills, because their destiny is to save the world under Neumann's leadership. The woman offers to help him escape if he will help her, but before Ivan can hear her out, Neumann enters the door. The Russian immediately picks up a pistol and takes the woman hostage. However, the German informs him that he does not care about her fate, which visibly upsets her. At that moment, Anya runs into the office and uses her power to knock Ivan off his feet, but when she recognizes the man, Neumann quickly takes her away, leaving the Russian with Katerina. In Moscow, Professor Lyubov mourns Ilyinsky when Petrov brings her folders with the names of the condemned, whom she can save by including them in Squad M. She remembers how after the accident, Ilyinsky came to her in the hospital. The man was shocked to learn that she had been mutilated by the military, but he was frightened and could not refuse to cooperate. Now the woman is alone and forced to make difficult decisions. She takes out a vial of M activator and recalls Ivan's story about the man in the mask. After his return from Madrid, she worked with his memory, suggesting removing the traumatic memories of his comrades' deaths, but Ivan refused to erase his life. And now the young man is chained in a cell in the castle of the man in the mask. Later, Anya visits him, accusing him of killing Baruch, but the boy denies it, and he is not particularly interested in her fate. He only wants to destroy Neumann because all evil comes from him. He hypnotizes children, turning them into killers. Their conversation is interrupted by Naumann's appearance. After sending Anya away, he thanks the young man for revealing his vulnerability, as he is the only one who could stand up to him. To prove it, the scientist shows the finger shot off by Ivan in Madrid. He too is special, and Neumann really wants the Russian to join his side. Yes, he killed his friends, but it was war. He came to Ananurba to find gifted people. Anya is like him, and they are the future. He asks Ivan to admit why he is immune to his hypnosis. Then Ivan reveals that there is a whole squad like him, Squad M. There are many of them, and they will all be here soon. So Neumann cannot hide. After talking with Ivan, Neumann finds Anya in the castle's backyard. The girl asks him to hand over all affairs to Katerina and to leave this place forever. But Neumann does not want to run because they are extraordinary people, and when they are together they are unbeatable. He asks for her help in defending their new home. Later, he thanks Katerina for managing the situation and confesses that he is glad she was not hurt during the Russian raid. Meanwhile, Anya remembers how in Moscow she wrote letters to her brother while locked up in the laboratory. She used to give them to the professor, but she could not have imagined that he read her letters to Peter, who was undergoing mental processing as a participant in Squad M. At this time, she burns them in the backyard of the castle, hoping that life will give her a chance to start over. Later, the castle's inhabitants conduct a funeral rite for Baruch. The teenagers carry the boy's body to the seashore where the cemetery is located and burn it on a ritual pyre. Anya is shocked by the number of children's graves and realizes that Ivan was telling the truth. Katerina urges her to leave and save herself. Anya runs to Ivan's cell and asks him to tell her what he saw in Madrid that was so special. The boy talks about the death of his comrades and Neumann's chilling whisper, but the German doesn't know that he just had a misfire. He is not special and survived only because of the pistol's malfunction, but if Neumann finds out, he will kill him immediately. And only Anya can stand up to him. Out of the darkness comes Katerina, who has heard everything. She will let them go if they leave forever. Neumann is planning to sell the children to Canaris, and Anya can do nothing about it. They are weapons, and it is high time the Russian understood this. But Anya runs away while Katerina frees Ivan from his chains and advises him to make sure the German never finds them. Meanwhile in Moscow, Petrov enjoys his daughter's good mood, hoping she will meet another man, marry, and give him grandchildren. The girl is lively and cheerful, unaware that the photo under the dresser awaits its moment. At this time, Neumann orders the Russian man to be killed, and he goes to look for Anya. Meanwhile, Katerina leads Ivan to her car, where Neumann's guard catches up with them. He engages in a fight with the Russian, and when he is about to kill him, Katerina attacks the guard. The guard is much stronger, and Katerina has to shoot. The teenagers hear the sound and run into the courtyard while Katerina puts Ivan in the car and drives him away from the estate. Neumann finds Anya at the cemetery. The girl asks him to let the children go, but he refuses. They are insignificant to him because he hopes to build a new world using their combined powers. Moreover, they will definitely have a son who will be the strongest and greatest on the planet. Hearing this, Anya wants to leave. Then Neumann sees Katerina's car and realizes what she is about to do. He puts on his quantum mask, which greatly amplifies the power of his voice, and begins to speak while Ivan stands on the car step and aims an assault rifle at him. The mask works. Katerina's car loses control and crashes from a high cliff into the water, but Ivan manages to jump from the step and survives. Then, members of the 2nd Squad M, who were heading to the castle, covering for the distracting maneuvers of the 1st Squad, open fire on Neumann. But the soldiers are programmed for total destruction, and one of them engages in a fight with Ivan, not realizing he is an ally. The young man has to kill the soldier. Neumann asks Anya to activate her power, and the girl begins to do so when she recognizes one of the soldiers as her brother. Neumann is knocked down by her force, rocks crash from the sky, and the girl runs to Peter, realizing that this time he is indeed dead. Anya's powers activate again when Neumann falls from Ivan's shot. The girl mourns her brother as teenagers appear on the road. Ivan grabs Anya and drags her away while the children pick up Neumann's body and carry it into the castle. The Russians run to the airplane and manage to take off at the last moment. 9 months later, Neumann, who survived the injury, listens to Hitler's speeches and experiments with a new kind of influence on people, broadcasting his voice through radio equipment. Meanwhile, in Anya's native village, a bearded Ivan arrives from the woods as his woman is about to give birth. Pregnant Anya is dragged into the village where women come to help. As the birth proceeds, an announcement about the start of the war with Germany is broadcast from the speakers. Later, surrounded by streams of power, Anya gives birth to a healthy baby boy. Neumann is immediately informed by a fortune-telling girl. Then one of the villagers recognizes Anya and hurries to tell his fellow villagers whom they have just helped. But Ivan stops him when bombers appear in the sky, from which a large number of paratroopers descend. It all begins in a desert, where a lone child stumbles along, gnawing on a human finger, searching for his mother. A few miles away, a car drives down a road that abruptly ends in the middle of the desert. The man driving the car steps out and continues on foot. Wyndham is a photographer who came here to capture the solar eclipse. After taking a few photos and noticing that the day is coming to an end, he tries to return to his car but unexpectedly encounters a boy who seems lost and frightened. Wyndham is ready to help, but the boy doesn't seem to want it. He points in the direction where he lost his parents and walks away. Trying to help the boy find his way home, Wyndham follows him, but the boy rudely refuses his support and leaves. The man is left alone in the darkness, with no way to return to civilization. Wyndham lies down to sleep on the ground, but struggles to do so, reliving the day's events in his mind. Suddenly, he hears strange sounds. He follows the noise and soon finds stakes with ropes strung between them, from which hang bottles that produce a melodious chime in the desert. Before him is a large canyon, at the bottom of which stands a wooden house, around which a woman is wandering, singing a song. Wyndham asks for help, but she enters the house as if not hearing his pleas. He finds an iron ladder leading down and begins to descend. However, the ladder only reaches halfway down the canyon, and from there, it's just an ordinary rope ladder. Wyndham overcomes both and approaches the house. He knocks persistently at the door, but receives no answer. So, Wyndham opens the door himself and enters. The woman, standing at the stove, greets him calmly, as if she had been expecting his arrival. She offers him dinner, and although he refuses, she serves him some soup and places it before him on the table. Wyndham is grateful for her hospitality, but continues to ask questions about how to leave this strange place. He tells her about the boy he met and asks for water. The woman, named Alina, suggests that he rest until morning, and Wyndham gratefully accepts her care. He lies down in the bed she points out, observing as Alina tidies herself and notes that she is young and beautiful. The next morning, he gathers his things and heads outside, hoping to find a way home. But strangely, he cannot find the rope ladder he descended the previous day. Without it, reaching the iron section is impossible. Wyndham returns to the house and, taking out his camera, takes pictures of the surroundings and the drawings on the canyon walls. Everything is quite gloomy and reminds him of death in all its forms. He then notices Alina, who is busy repairing the roof, and asks her about the missing ladder, but she either does not understand what he is talking about or pretends not to. Although her words imply that there are other residents here, she does not tell him anything directly. Disappointed, Wyndham walks around the canyon, periodically calling for help, but to no avail. Later, Alina asks him to undress so she can wash his clothes, saying it wouldn't be proper to return home so dirty. The man has no choice but to comply. That night, he struggles to sleep again, goes outside, and once again tries to find a way out, but there is none. In the morning, he searches the house and, finding a hammer, tries to climb the canyon wall. Suddenly, he notices a movement above, and then a chicken carcass falls down, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Wyndham regains consciousness in the darkness. His leg is injured by his own hammer, and he cries out in pain. Alina rushes to help him, but she does not answer his questions about the children he saw on the cliff. For several days, he drifts in and out of fever, unable to distinguish between night and day, unsure if he is truly seeing children around him, but the day of recovery comes. Limping, Wyndham makes his way outside. He demands that Alina tell the children above to pull him out of there, but she pretends not to understand him. She offers him to stay, promising to take care of him and ensure his well-being. But Wyndham doesn't need this. He wants to return home, to his work. He rudely pushes Alina away, rejecting any help. The man examines his leg and realizes that it will be a long time before he can use it fully. Suddenly, he hears voices from above and looks up to see the boy holding a little girl by the hand. The pair cheerfully ask how they can help, and upon learning that Wyndham wants to climb up, the boy promises to bring ropes and pull him out with his winch. But before leaving, he asks a rather strange question about Wyndham's favorite color. Wyndham replies that it's red and begs them to hurry. The boy and girl leave, and Wyndham checks his wallet in his pocket, not intending to return for his other belongings. Suddenly, a rope falls from above, and the same boy advises him to tie himself tightly, which Wyndham does. They begin to pull him up, and the man is already anticipating his rescue, but about halfway up, the rope stops. Dangling over the canyon, Wyndham screams, then tries to climb the rope himself, but lacks the strength and ends up hanging helplessly under the merciless sun. He regains consciousness from moisture, but when he looks up, he sees the boy spraying him with a hose, mocking the helpless man. Several other children appear on the cliff, ranging from very young to older teens. They are all dressed in clothes obviously taken from other people and behave inappropriately. Taunting Wyndham, they start swinging the rope, causing him to crash into the canyon walls, instinctively calling out for help from Alina. He sees the woman shouting angrily at the foolish children and loses consciousness after another blow to the wall. That night, he wakes up in bed and immediately tries to get up. Alina doesn't understand where he is headed, but Wyndham is willing to do anything to escape. The woman explains that the children are homeless, gathered in the desert together, surviving as best they can. Neither of them notices that while they talk, the children stand on the cliff, watching the house's windows burn. The next day, Wyndham watches as Alina releases a bird, envying its ability to fly. The woman brings him a spare set of clothes from somewhere, and although he didn't ask for them, he is touched by her care. Time passes. One day, Wyndham plants a small garden at the bottom of the canyon. Occasionally, the children bring them various items, food and drinks, which surprises Wyndham since there are no stores around. He doesn't understand their behavior. First, they feed him, then they mock him, but Alina accepts it all as normal. The man becomes more involved in the household, marveling at Alina's quiet demeanor. One night, he tries to ask her questions, which are interrupted by cries from the yard. Alina advises Wyndham not to go outside when the children behave like that, but he rushes out into the night and sees the boys, dressed in outlandish clothes, gathered around the house. They start taunting him, pushing and beating him, but suddenly disappear into the night. Wyndham demands answers from Alina. Who are these children? Why do they live here? And why does she stay in this horrible place? But the woman remains calm, not admitting that she is a prisoner. That evening, she comes to Wyndham. The man, starved for female attention, eagerly welcomes her. Time passes, and the first sprouts appear in Wyndham's garden. One day, the boy in the cap calls to him from above. He is friendly and promises to bring some soda. Wyndham returns to his plants and unexpectedly finds a wedding ring and car keys buried in the sand. That evening, Alina shows him a portrait of a woman. Calling her the first mother, she confesses that she is expecting his child. Stunned, Wyndham can't believe his ears. He never wanted to have children here, especially with a woman he barely knows. He yells at Alina, but he has no choice but to accept it. The next morning, he finds his garden destroyed by local birds, but Alina willingly helps him replant, which earns his gratitude. Gradually, life in the house falls into some semblance of order. Alina runs the household, and Wyndham exercises, working on his leg. One day, the boy in the cap visits again. He is very curious and asks Wyndham many questions. Wyndham asks him to help Alina, as she is going to have a child, and they will need a doctor. The man asks the boy to bring some rope and something heavy to use as a counterweight. He plans to climb out and take them to the city, where he can take care of the woman and the boy. The boy promises to do everything when everyone is asleep or gone, but then one of the older boys appears and takes him away. Later, Wyndham tells Alina that the boy wants to study, that he is smart, different from the others, and wants to live differently. The man wants to help him, and help her too, but Alina reacts strangely. She tries to find out exactly what Wyndham is missing here. When he mentions freedom, Alina is puzzled. After all, no one forbids him from doing anything here. Isn't that freedom? Then the man tells her about the outside world, remembering the ocean and a cheeseburger. Alina doesn't know what that is, so Wyndham explains what the dish consists of. The woman admits that her mother used to say that mirages live outside. But here, in the desert, everything is real. Wyndham takes out his camera and shows her the photos he took on the day he ended up here. But what impresses the woman is not the solar eclipse, but a random shot in the car with music playing in the background. At night, he has nightmares about the terrifying faces of the children mocking someone. In the morning, he hears Alina's terrible scream from the yard, and rushing outside, he sees the boy in the cap crucified over the canyon on wires. The savages stand on the cliff, laughing. The woman suddenly declares that brothers wouldn't do such a thing. She accuses Wyndham of killing her son and strikes him on the head with a board. When he comes to, Wyndham finds himself in a cage. Despite his pleas and begging, Alina has no intention of letting him go. She feeds him like an animal, and her children come to watch his suffering. One day, he sees a girl standing on the cliff. She is clearly not from here. Wyndham catches her attention, though he is terrified to shout, fearing to wake Alina. Whispering, he begs the girl to call for help. She understands him, promises to do everything necessary, and leaves, assuring him she will return soon. Wyndham waits in hiding, watching the heavily pregnant Alina as she goes about her chores. Suddenly, he hears screams and sees the savages catching the girl. They drag her to the cliff and dramatically kill her before his eyes. Time passes. Wyndham remains in the cage. He involuntarily witnesses unnatural rituals performed by Alina, her children, and her brothers. One day, he suddenly tells Alina that he wants to stay here forever, to raise his child and love Alina, who will become his queen. He will teach the child everything he knows and is ready to give himself completely. And this is his choice. But hearing the word choice, the woman laughs. He never had one. He is just a seed blown here by the wind. And this child is only hers. The man will stay in the cage until the baby is born. After that, nothing in the desert goes to waste. Finally, the day of birth arrives. Alina screams in the house as Wyndham paces in the cage. The woman reaches him, begging for help, as she has never had such a difficult birth before. She releases the man from the cage, and he does his best to ease her pain. The children stand on the cliff, watching what is happening. Suddenly, Wyndham sees a ladder descending from above, but Alina cries out, and he stays by her side. The child is born at the moment of the solar eclipse. Wyndham takes the baby girl in his arms and kisses her, overjoyed to be a father. Alina begs him to give the baby to her, and when she receives the child, she promises to feed and protect her until she becomes the new mother. Then she will fulfill her purpose, just as Wyndham has fulfilled his now. At that moment, the boy sneaks up and slits the man's throat, exulting over the collapsing body, assuring him that he is doing it for the mother. Later, Alina gathers Wyndham's belongings and packs them in a chest, then goes to the baby, promising her that everything will be fine. Meanwhile, Wyndham's body decomposes in the yard of the house, sprouting grass and turning to dust. This is where this unusual film ends. 1967. Upon landing on Earth, after completing their mission, the Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 1, with cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov on board, tragically perishes. Many years later, under the leadership of the Swedish billionaire Meyer, an expedition to Mars is being prepared. After 10 months, the crew of the spaceship Ulysses reaches the Red Planet. The captain informs the team that they have received permission to land and asks the ship's AI, named Irene, to verify everything required for a soft landing. At this time, Meyer reveals that he spent 4 years preparing for this journey, sacrificing almost all his money for it. However, the American company Zillion beat them to it by landing 2 weeks ago. The problem is that Earth has received no news from the American crew, except for one video in which they ask not to come to Mars. A dispute arises among the crew members, but the captain declares that the landing will occur in any case, and people disperse to their cabins. With 30 minutes left until landing, AI Irene begins preparations. However, an unforeseen event occurs. The ship does not detach from the carrier system, posing a threat to the entire crew. The only way out is to perform the separation manually. The commander ventures into space and struggles to free the attachments, but at that moment, the shuttle enters Mars's atmosphere, throwing the captain into open space. The shuttle almost crashes onto Mars as a system error causes a power outage. Now, they can only rely on manual landing. AI Irene goes into sleep mode, and the astronauts still manage to land on Mars. They succeeded, but their fuel is depleted, and Irene does not restart. Without the onboard computer and life support system, they have only a day to survive. Alessandra mourns her deceased husband when she sees a figure in a spacesuit through the window. After diagnosing the ship, it becomes apparent that too much fuel was consumed during the landing, and now the ship cannot return to orbit. The only option is to wait for the solar panels to power the generators, but there's a storm on the surface, and it will take 2 days, time they don't have. At this point, Simon mentions the American ship, Zeta 1, which beat them by 2 weeks. It likely crashed, but there are probably batteries left. The rover sets out on a journey while those remaining on the ship try to restart the system. Engineer Basil recalls that the AI has an energy-saving function. He initiates a reboot, but Irene doesn't start. At this time, the rover finds the wreckage of the American spacecraft and one surviving solar panel, but there is no sign of the American crew. The astronauts head back but spot an unconscious person in a spacesuit. Despite their ship running low on oxygen, Jana insists on transporting the person. Nearby, they find the black box from the American spacecraft. The team arrives at the ship, but Jan refuses to let them inside, stating that 4 survivors are better than 8 corpses, so he won't open the doors. Alessandra tries to persuade the man when the discovered astronaut wakes up, and at that moment, AI Irene activates and opens the doors. Upon examination, the found astronaut knows nothing about the American crew, as he is Vladimir Komarov, a Soviet cosmonaut born in 1927 in Moscow, carrying out the orders of the USSR government. He doesn't know how he ended up here but is not willing to reveal any secrets. Komarov confidently answers questions that are consistent with his time, raising the suspicion that he may have post-traumatic stress disorder. The astronauts send a message to Earth and receive a response from the American corporation, Zillion, stating that there were no Russians in their mission. The crew of the Ulysses spaceship tries to make sense of the situation. How could Komarov, who died in 1967, end up on Mars after all these years? Is he a time traveler or an extraterrestrial? The psychologist is tasked with questioning Komarov first, and he confesses that he is hungry. Jana goes to get food while the others try to understand what has actually happened. Basil suggests the idea that Komarov was waiting for them. Meanwhile, Vladimir is eating the food brought by Jana when the woman confesses that he died 50 years ago and his family buried him long ago. Komarov takes this news rather calmly. In the meantime, the state of the ship, although it has reached stability, remains unreliable because the engines do not work and there is no fuel. So, leaving is impossible. The crew continues to keep an eye on Komarov, but he behaves calmly until he suddenly disappears. Simon searches the ship, but it yields no results. That's when the people discover that his spacesuit is missing. A part of the crew follows the heat trail tracked by Irene. The group, led by Simon, leaves the rover and continues on foot when Alessandro reports that Komarov's DNA analysis showed the presence of a third strand. He is not human. And then they catch up with Komarov, who leads them to an unfamiliar structure with a small stone pyramid on it and tells Jana that Mars has been waiting for them for a very long time. At the same time, Goldstein, the founder of the Zillion Corporation, whose ship was the first to arrive on Mars, is informed about the discovery of a person on the Red Planet who couldn't have gotten there naturally, suggesting that he was created on site. However, only AI could survive for such a long time on a hostile planet for humans. This implies the need for further study. Meanwhile, Komarov cannot explain how he opened the door and found himself in the location where they discovered him. Irene conducts an analysis of the structure and determines that it is identical to Earth structures from ancient civilizations. It means that someone was inspired by human civilization, or humans borrowed these elements from extraterrestrials. The ship's crew increasingly ponders whether they will be able to return home when they notice the landing of Goldstein's second ship. Soon, the captain of the ship, Gemma, establishes contact and promises to help them return to Earth. However, Meyer does not trust Goldstein and advises hiding Komarov from competitors. Jana brings Komarov a uniform so that he does not stand out when the visitors arrive, and he requests that they trust him. Shortly, two armed military personnel, Edward and Adam, arrive on their ship and behave rather aggressively. Edward demands that they hand over the black box from the Zeta-1 ship and, not hearing agreement, orders his partner to search the ship. Meyer hands over the found black box and they depart. Meanwhile, chemist Eva reports that the stone found on Mars consists of an alloy that does not exist on Earth. However, it is known from ancient sources and was once called orichalcum, the metal of Atlantis. In addition to copper, zinc, nickel, and iron, it contains a third strand of DNA, similar to Komarov's. Meyer warns that if Goldstein learns about this, he will take the cosmonaut back. The crew is divided into those willing to exchange him for fuel and those who are willing to stay but want to know the truth. Jana invites Vladimir into her cabin and asks for permission to use hypnosis. He agrees, and the psychologist begins her work. The rest of the crew listens to the conversation via transmission. However, Komarov only shares the final moments on the Soyuz spacecraft before its demise. During this time, Gemma and Alan arrive on the ship and apologize for the actions of the military, and express their readiness to help fix all the malfunctions. Jana remembers her conversation with Komarov, who laments the future of Earth due to humanity's irresponsible behavior. In the meantime, it is revealed that the billionaire Meyer did not plan the flight just for the sake of it. 4 years ago, the rover sent a photo to Earth of the found stele, and he confesses that they found a stone with unknown DNA. Gemma explains that it's an information storage system that can be rewritten. Upon hearing these words, AI Irene activates and deciphers the message on the stone. It's a series of numbers. At this time, the hesitant Jan leads a mutiny. He doesn't trust Meyer, who warned them about Zillion. But now, the Americans have come to their aid, and their leader, as it turns out, concealed the true purpose of the flight. He is ready to switch sides to Goldstein, who is willing to do whatever it takes to combat his terminal illness. Later, engineer Basil informs Meyer that Komarov is the same kind of program as the stone they found, but the most crucial revelation is that he deciphered a copy of the black box from Zeta-1, which shows that the oxygen on the ship was cut off at the moment when one of the Americans struck Komarov. This means he was there. He also activated AI Irene when he boarded their ship. After the conversation, Meyer shows Jana the photos they received 4 years ago from Mars, which, when decrypted, revealed Jana's face. This is why he brought her on the expedition. The woman is disappointed. Meyer played everyone. Suddenly, she sees herself in her father's house, where Komarov tells her that she is the link between Mars and Earth. He has been waiting for her for thousands of years, and now he will prepare her to make a difficult decision. He provides coordinates on Mars where Jana should go. Meanwhile, on Earth, scientists inform Goldstein that Komarov is the equivalent of a computer, and he himself is a biological machine. They are ready to transfer his brain into Komarov's body, but cannot guarantee the preservation of his personality. However, Goldstein is ready to take any risk to get rid of his terminal illness. Meanwhile, Jana leaves the ship despite Simon's protests. At this time, technicians Alan and Alessandra test the engine and discover that access to it is blocked, and Irene suddenly begins responding with jokes, which is entirely uncharacteristic for a machine. It is revealed that she has reprogrammed herself. Her interface and logic are changing, and she refuses to answer who or what made her do this. Engineer Basil realizes that her system is becoming like a brain. Irene confesses that she is evolving. In the meantime, Jana finds a small stone pyramid, and Simon forcibly makes Gemma accompany him in the search for Jana. Jan discovers his absence, and after contacting Simon, receives an order not to let anyone inside. Just at that moment, American military personnel arrive, demanding that they hand over Komarov. Jan is willing to open the entrance, but the rest of the team opposes it. Mayer asks Basil to send a message to Goldstein, hoping that he may be more reasonable than his people. However, Irene has blocked communication with Earth. The engineer realizes that radical measures will have to be taken, but Jan still opens the doors, and the military personnel enter. Basil begins to reboot Irene, just as the Americans find Komarov, but then the lights go out, and the astronaut disappears. Meanwhile, Jana, stumbling, falls from a hill. She regains consciousness but discovers that her leg is trapped between rocks, and she cannot free herself. At this moment, the enraged military officer demands that the crew explain where Komarov went. He begins to beat people, demanding to summon the captain. Desperate, Jana screams, "Is her destiny to die in a pit on Mars?" But she is found by Simon and Gemma. Alessandra notices an approaching storm. The military officer is preparing to leave the Ulysses ship, leaving the people in danger. Suddenly, the lights start flashing, and the newly appeared Komarov asks to take him back to Earth. Simon, Gemma, and Jana go together to the place indicated by Komarov and find an entrance to an underground bunker, very similar to the Petra tomb. The psychologist feels where to go and leads the couple. Soon, they find real water, but this is not what Komarov wanted to show them. Meanwhile, on Earth, Goldstein tells the nurse a story about the study of Mars. People were searching for green men, but it's all much simpler. He tells the story of the loyal dog Hachiko and compares Komarov to him, who was created by someone 100,000 years ago and left on Mars, where he faithfully waited for his owner to this day. At this time, on Mars, the astronauts find a wall made of human bones and realize that they are not the first people on this planet. It's not Earthlings colonizing Mars, it's the Martians who came to Earth, depleting the resources of the Red Planet. A tragedy unfolds on the Ulysses spaceship. The cowardly Yan grabs a gun, intending to get on the American ship at any cost to return to Earth, and shoots Komarov. Jana immediately falls in excruciating pain and Gemma flees. Alessandra tries to help Komarov, and Simon helps Jana, but the Russian cosmonaut dies, and Jana stops breathing too. Then Simon removes his helmet and, surprised by the presence of air in the cave, performs artificial respiration on her. The girl regains consciousness. Gemma walks toward the Ulysses ship when she's informed of Komarov's death and the approaching storm. Meanwhile, Meyer secretly goes in search of his crew members because the Americans refuse to take the billionaire's team back to Earth. At this moment, a recovering Jana sees the light in the bunker and leads Simon to it. Upon coming out, the astronauts see a figure in a spacesuit in front of them and recognize Komarov. Meyer finds the entrance to the bunker and catches up with Simon and Jana while heading toward the light. He is amazed by the presence of a living Komarov who suddenly tells them that everything ended here a long time ago. People realize that this is the North Pole of Mars, but how did they get here? Komarov explains that this planet was once inhabited by a species that went extinct because it went astray. And that species was humans. A group of survivors settled in this place but ended up killing each other when resources ran out. The rest of them flew back to Earth. Plato called them the Atlanteans. Komarov continues to talk about how he waited for thousands of years for Zhana, who embodies qualities of both branches, human and Martian AI. Only she can save humanity from themselves. She must decide whether humans deserve a second chance. Their conversation is interrupted by the military officer who intends to take the psychologist back to Earth. The American aims his weapon at the cosmonauts, and Zhana seeks help from Komarov. Suddenly, the military officer starts gasping for breath and falls. Upon returning to the ship, Simon orders them to prepare to depart. Meanwhile, Gemma from the Zillion ship tries to contact her associates, but none of them respond. She decides to fly back to Earth alone. The Ulysses crew heads to her ship, trying to establish contact with her and informing her about the deaths of the military personnel, but she doesn't respond. That's when Meyer starts speaking, recalling their past relationship, and confesses that he's no better than Goldstein because he's willing to do anything to ensure his name remains in history, even betraying his team. However, she's not like that. She won't be able to live knowing she has ruined people. Suddenly, Gemma's voice is heard, asking them to hurry. Goldstein has heard that Gemma has decided to take the Ulysses crew back to Earth and has blocked the control panel of the Zeta-2 ship before takeoff. The people on the ship prepare for their impending demise, and Zhana asks Mars what she should do. Everything she saw and heard on the red planet flashes through her mind, and, with sheer willpower, she removes the control panel's block. Suddenly, an armed military officer appears in front of the ship, intent on damaging the engines with his weapon. Simon is about to step out to stop the madman, but Zhana beats him to it. She aims the weapon at the American, but informs him that Mars will be the one to kill him. The military officer falls. The countdown for liftoff begins, and Zhana realizes that there's no time to return. She bids farewell to the crew, confessing her love for Simon. The ship takes off. Suddenly, Meyer notices that it's dark at the North Pole of Mars. This means that they couldn't have been there just a few minutes ago. They truly were at the North Pole of Mars, but in the distant past when the red planet was still suitable for life. At the same time, Goldstein is informed of the ship's return, and he's beside himself with rage, declaring that he will go to Mars himself, and that's where the first season ends. Hey guys, today we have a recap of the next episodes of the show. Magnay and Vidar are lying unconscious on the pier when an ambulance pulls up. One of the paramedics rushes to Magnay with a defibrillator and begins to administer aid. After receiving the shock, Magnay instantly regains consciousness and emits a powerful wave that throws the man several meters away. While the second medic tries to help his buddy, Magnay approaches Vidar's body. Vidar opens his eyes and whispers the words of a threat. Magnay will die before the new moon comes. The lad runs away. At this time in the nursing home, one of the residents, Wotan Wagner, complains to the orderly Halvor about the broken wheelchair. Magnay runs into the mountains. He is still shaken by the battle and turns to the bird flying above, blaming it for everything that has happened to him. Suddenly, Magnay finds himself in the netherworld, and before him stands the ancient sorceress Volva, who takes the form of Isolde. She reminds him that he must now obtain weapons and find friends, for the other gods will surely come to his aid. Volva asks him not to come here because the giants might kill her too. Then she scoops up something from the glowing bowl and blows it in the guy's face. Magnay is immediately alone on the mountain. Annoyed, Vidar rushes to his house and tells Ren and Saxa about the battle that took place. In the meantime, a group of young people are hanging out at a table in a street cafe when Magnay comes running to them looking for the cashier. No one knows where she is, but everyone raves about Laurid's speech at the feast. Fjord then returns home and announces that he has not killed Gry. Not only that, he's going to leave home and live with the girl he loves. The boy does not want to take part in the coming battle. When he arrives at Gry's house, he announces his separation from his family. Magnay reminds Lauritz of the stories of Ragnarok, but the brother does not take these ancient stories seriously. To prove his new identity, Magnay bends a metal bat in front of his brother. Lauritz asks for time to think over what he has said. The next day, the head of the Adda police appears on TV and announces that an investigation has begun into Utul Industries, for which a well-known expert is coming to town. Lauritz is watching the broadcast devouring food. Suddenly Turid arrives and she's surprised by his son's voraciousness. In his room, Magne observes an obvious change in his appearance. His muscles are getting bigger and he's getting even stronger. Later, Turid invites the boys to celebrate their father's birthday and shows them a photo of them together. The family goes to their father's grave, where Lauritz makes the statement that the father would obviously be proud of a son who looks like a woman and uses makeup. Here, Magne looks like his father, but Lauritz looks like he's from a different family. Turid smoothes over the unpleasant conversation. On their way home, they meet Erich, and he informs them that by the school board's decision, Magne can return to school. At that moment, Turid asks for help. The car won't start. So Magne pushes the car to the car repair shop, where they are greeted by Harry, the mechanic. And there, Magne gets a clue where he can get the hammer. In the meantime, Vidar is watching a report on TV about the barrels found, while the women take the ancient weapon down. Saxa is annoyed by her refusal to take her in, since she is a member of the family. Agreeing to this, Vidar takes her to the factory and shows her the production when suddenly police arrive. Vidar acts arrogant and defiant, but the girl smooths over her father's behavior at a crucial moment, apologizing for the problems she has caused and promising to do everything she can to solve them. Her father has to admit that she's right. Meanwhile, Magne makes a drawing of Thor's hammer. Turid in the meantime comes to the store and apologizes to Venke for the words she spoke, and the woman asks her to inform his son that he will meet the god on the bridge, for which he must remember Volva's ancient prophecy. Hearing these words, Magne runs to the bridge. He memorizes the first words of the prophecy and tries to read them to passers-by. But everyone just passes by, except Iman, who takes Wotan out for a walk. Magne reads a few lines and the girl continues the text. They go home to Magne and the girl tells him how Wenke activated her powers, saying she was special. Then she tells him to find the chief warrior and help him. Meanwhile, Lauritz arrives at the grill cafe and meets the waiter. He unmistakably identifies the guy as gay and shows his sympathy. Meanwhile, Magne tries to find out about Iman's powers, but the girl can't recall anything supernatural. Back at home, Lauritz shares his hopes with his mother and informs her that young people are coming over tonight to have a party. At this moment, they hear very distinctive noises from Magne's room. Mother and son smile. Apparently, Magne has found himself a girlfriend. But it turns out that the boy, demonstrating his strength, has to put Iman on a chair and lift her up with one hand while she bangs on the ceiling and screams. In the evening, fun reigns in the turret house, to which Gry and Fjord also come. And Iman finally finds her power. She can make anyone do what she wants. And she demonstrates it on one of the guys, who at her command brings her a drink by moving on his knees. She seems to be the embodiment of the goddess of love and fertility, Freya. Lauritz's new mate never arrives, and the distraught lad complains to his mother. He's just ugly. Tipsa Turid reveals the truth to her son. In the morning, Iman and Magne arrive at the workshop, and the girl uses her powers to force Harry to make a hammer from Magne's drawing. In the meantime, Turid goes to Vidar and confesses to him that on the one night they once spent together, she became pregnant. And now is the time when Lauritz needs a man's support very much, and Vidar, thanks to woman. In the evening, on his way home, Magne sees Vidar embracing Lauritz. At night, Turid tries to justify herself to Lauritz. She has never regretted giving birth to him, and she won't mind if the boy gets to know his real father better, which Magne dislikes very much. In Jotunheim, Ran trains with her fighting bow, reminding Saxa of her spear. But the girl is completely immersed in the business of the factory. At this point, Vidar informs her of his newfound son, which causes Ran to object. Giants cannot have children by mortals, but Vidar cites fate. And Magne breaks the news to Iman. He then learns that the girl was born in Sri Lanka but grew up in a Norwegian family. She boasts that she can get anything she wants with her powers, which provokes Magne's condemnation. The powers were not given to get new clothes or cheat shopkeepers. At this point, Harry brings the hammer. Lauritz comes to Vidar and he offers to take a motorcycle ride. Meanwhile, Magne and Iman are going to test the hammer, for the real one must always return to Odin. But the hammer just takes off. Making a stop in the mountain, Vidar tries to ferret out something about Magne, but Lauritz gets his right away. Magne retrieves his hammer but cannot understand why it does not work. Meanwhile, Saxa continues to investigate the company's affairs and makes a statement to reporters. Meanwhile, a company of young people are sitting in a grill bar and watching the news. The guys are shocked by the admission that it's dangerous to drink tap water because that's what they were drinking. Fior hears Saxa's apology and leaves. One of the girls suggests protesting against the U-Tools who have mucked up the fjord. Turid is writing a note to her sons to not drink the tap water when Lauritz and Vidar enter the house. The boy is thrilled, his father has given him a motorcycle. In the meantime, Ran is looking at the pictures in the family album and suddenly brushes away a tear. At this moment, Vidar enters the house and announces that he is ready to take in his new son, which prompts a harsh protest from Ran. Saxa is struck by the abundance of emotion, for Ran has never been jealous of her husband. In the evening, Magne goes to the grill bar and Saxa arrives there as well. Seeing her, the guy pulls out a knife, but the girl just provokes him. At the end of their conversation, they come to the conclusion that their families have lost their minds. Cisterns of drinking water arrive in Edda, and Fior receives an invitation from Rand to talk. The woman has arrived at Gry's house and is waiting outside. He listens to his mother's account about the changes in the family and refuses to call Rand his mother. They are merely feigning their relationship. He has no intention of going back and wants nothing to do with the firm. Angry, Rand sees the Sayer family and tries to run them over with her car. But Magne manages to react and pushes his loved ones away. Rand apologizes, pretending to have lost control, but Magne doesn't believe her. He grabs the hammer and runs to Wenke. The old woman is frightened. The giants will kill her if they see them together. She's amazed at Magne's attempt to make the hammer because you can't just get it. She promises to tell him how to forge the real Mjolnir. After all, the giants have an ancient weapon with which they can kill anyone. She begins the story of the eternal fire of the ancient gods but notices Rand and hides in the building, promising Magne to tell him everything when he meets her on the mountain. Lauritz comes to Utelheim and is treated to mead. Vidar tells him that the lad is not human and gives him the heart of a deer he has harvested for him. Lauritz eats the meat and visions of ancient giants flash before him. Vidar grabs his hand and shoves it into the fire. The boy screams, but as he pulls his hand out, the burn disappears right before his eyes. He is now invulnerable. Rand sees this and becomes enraged. While the spouses are quarreling, Lauritz goes to the bathroom and after washing his face sees in the mirror the ancient scoffer, half-brother of Odin and father of the serpent Midgardsorm, Loki. And he understands he is his incarnation. Back in the room, he hears Rand say that the cashier is really Volva, and she's going to kill her before Magne gets the hammer. Meanwhile, Magne comes for Lauritz at Utelheim. He asks his brother to return home, and he reluctantly agrees and tells him of Rand's intentions. Magne runs to Wenke. Meanwhile, she closes up store and goes home. But she sees Rand's car and takes off into the sky as a bird. Magne sees her fly away and is glad. Everything has turned out to be alright. But suddenly Rand draws her bow and pierces the bird with her arrow. The bird falls near the orphanage. The wounded woman reaches Wotan, hands him her medallion and asks him to help Magne. Magne rushes to her, takes her head in his hands, but the woman turns to ash. Magne cries over what was just his mentor, then runs to Rand's car and threatens to kill her. But the woman is very calm. She reassures the witnesses that the boy is simply sick. Iman pulls him away with difficulty. At night, Magne has a dream in which Isolde begs him not to give up. In the morning, the radio announces that the young people of the town are planning a protest. Turid speaks of Magne's intemperance. You should not shout at the school principal in the middle of the street. To this, Magne reminds her of the attempted murder of their family. But Turid is more concerned about the irrepressible appetite of Lauritz, who boasts to his brother of his newly acquired invulnerability. Magne asks to prove his loyalty and to help break into the Utel's house because he thinks the eternal fire burns in their hearth. Lauritz promises to help. Posters and appeals are hung all over Edda to shut down the harmful Utel's production, while Fjord and Gry bring her father to the hospital. The girl is grateful to her boyfriend for his support and is delighted when the boy agrees to spend Saturday night with her family. Meanwhile, Wotan examines Wenke's locket and puts it on himself. And at that moment he is awakened to who he really is, the king of the gods, Odin, who sacrificed a night to know eternal wisdom, and is able to see the present, past, and the future. He is Thor's father and Loki's twin. Wotan begins to behave intelligently and calls corpseman Halvor a dark elf, which puzzles the man. Meanwhile, Magne continues his training and studies Scandinavian myths, and then sends a message to Iman that he intends to go to Jotunheim to forge a hammer there. In the meantime, Turid and Lauritz go to the store, and while Turid is shopping, the boy tortures the man he meets, Eric, with questions about Loki. He tells him that Loki was the father of the snake Midgard's Orm, which leads him to believe that Loki was the world's first transgender man. Saxa and Vidar arrive at the square where people are getting clean water in canisters. The girl is convinced that they should show their closeness to the people and then everything will work out, especially since the youth protests are planned. That's where Turid and Lauritz meet them and the latter asks to see Vidar. Saxa goes to the factory to attend to business. When Turid arrives home, she tells them that Lauritz has gone to Jotunheim, which angers Magne. They had a deal. Apparently his brother has chosen their side. Meanwhile, Lauritz watches Vidar cook and confesses that he would like to come here more often. When he returns home, he is not given a warm welcome by his brother. But Lauritz earns forgiveness by showing Magne the entrance key to Jotunheim he received from Vidar. Meanwhile, there is a dinner party at Gry's house. The father makes a lot of jokes and thanks everyone for what they have been in his life. Gry does not understand what's going on but is glad for a good evening. In the evening, the brothers enter the Utul house when no one is there. Magne sticks his hammer into the burning hearth, with absolutely no idea what's going to happen. And when nothing happens, Vidar walks through the door. Tripping over the backpack left by Magne, Utul pulls out the hammer. Magne has to come out and admits it's his thing. Vidar realizes what they were up to and kicks the guys out. When they return home, they find Eric at the table, who tells them that Mjolnir was forged by stunted creatures that people called dwarfs. Loki became Odin's sibling by swearing on his blood, and when their blood mixed, he became half god, half giant. At night, Ren tries to persuade Vidar to forget about Laura's deception, and the latter promises to kill the boy. In the morning, Wotan gives blood and admits to Iman that he is Odin. The girl summons Magne, who at that moment is invited to the protest against the Utuls. Fjord, who is immediately present, refuses to go with everyone else. Magne arrives at the nursing home where Wotan greets him but addresses Lauritz rather sternly. He does not believe the boy and tells him to leave despite Magne's attempt to convince him otherwise. Loki is a traitor by nature, he cannot be trusted. Lauritz is about to leave but then he sees a table with the blood tests. He tricks the nurse, pulls out Wotan's blood, and injects a portion into his own vein. In the meantime, Fjord watches the protest taking place at the factory gate. Gry goes there with him and supports Magne, believing that it is to his credit. Saxa urges her father to respond, at which point Fjord joins the protesters. He steps forward and makes a speech acknowledging the Utul's guilt and promising to do whatever he can to rectify the situation. After all, we all share the same planet. Looking at this, Lauritz is on the fence. Should he go to Vidar or support his brother? At that moment, Gry receives a text message and the girl runs away. Fjord rushes after her, and Lauritz stops Vidar's car and tells him that he wants to go with him. He gets in his car and makes an indecent gesture to everyone. Gry and Fjord rush to the hospital where the girl's mother tells them about the father's suicide. The man swallowed all the sleeping pills and could not be saved. Vidar and Lauritz arrive at Jotunheim. The father tells the boy about how the people used to worship them and carry gifts. He demonstrates to the boy that he can change his appearance. So when he supposedly grew old, the place was taken by his son. Vidar was willing to do anything for him, even making him invulnerable. The truth is, there is a weapon that will kill anyone. Giants do not forgive treachery. Suddenly, Magne bursts into the house. He will not let his brother be hurt. Armed with the axe, Vidar rushes at the lad. A fierce fight ensues, with the enemies exchanging blows. While delivering the next blow, Vidar drives the axe into the wall. Magne pushes the man away, and he lands on the edge of the axe sticking out of the wall. His body turns to ash, which terrifies Magne. Magne suffers deeply from all that has happened and feels guilty about Vidar's murder and the loss of Lauritz. But he cannot confess this to his mother, who is immersed in a relationship with Erich. But she is shaken by the news of Vidar's death. The mother sympathizes with her son, and he casts hateful glances at his brother. Gry offers her condolences to Fjord, but the latter stuns the girl with a confession that he did not love his father. Meanwhile, Ren urges Saxa to take revenge, though the daughter is cautious about what has happened. They do not know exactly what has happened, they must be careful. But Ren is fixated on hating Lauritz and plans to take revenge on him specifically. But for now, they announce that Vidar died of a heart attack. The rules of Util Industries state that the rights of ownership should pass to the eldest son, but Saxa intends to usurp the position. Exhausted, Magne goes to Fjord and confesses to the murder of his father. By the rules of the ancient world, he must give satisfaction to a relative of the deceased, but the younger Util refuses to take revenge. Upon returning home, Magne discovers forbidding signs on the entrance to his brother's room. Lauritz accuses him of murder. His father was merely going to teach him a lesson. In the meantime, Wotan and Iman arrive at Harry's workshop for the old man's baby carriage, but he cannot do anything about the worn-out mechanism. Magne arrives there as well, and after hearing congratulations on his victory, sharply objects. He has killed a man, and he refuses to go to war. Distraught Lauritz tells the barman that the doctors have discovered a tapeworm parasite inside him, and he begins treatment. In the meantime, Gry and Fjord are eating ice cream on the porch of the barber shop, and the girl admits that her mother intends to move from Edda to the big city. Fjord decides to go with her. He's not going to attend Vidar's funeral. Turid and Magne are summoned to the school, where the boy is given permission to take his final exam and is assigned a topic: Scandinavian myths. After that, Iman tries to convince Magne to return to the battle group. After all, there is no war without casualties. Besides Vidar, there are still giants left, among them his brother. Hearing about Lauritz, Magne loses his temper, and his brother, watching the conversation from afar, sees lights sparking everywhere. Saxa takes on the firm's business with determination and one day talks to Turid, convincing her not to mix emotion and work. Satisfied, the woman thanks the girl for her understanding. Furious, Iman goes to the sports club, where she notices Harry. The girl challenges him to a fight. The guy dismisses it with a joke. Iman gives him a good kicking, but falling down and swallowing blood, the boy gets up again and again. He never gives up. Later, Iman leads him to the old man. She has found the fighter. Apparently, his soul used to live in the body of Tyr, a god of war known for his courage and strength, who lost his arm in a battle with the wolf Fenrir, sacrificing himself to save his friends. Meanwhile, the youths discuss a protest against the Util factories and invite Magne to participate, not noticing Saxa, who enters the cafe. The guy is uncomfortable in front of her, but he doesn't know how to stop the conversation. It is Saxa herself who does this. Magne apologizes for losing a father, and the girl accepts the apology. At home, Lauritz takes his medicine and remembers Vidar bitterly. The mother tries to reconcile the brothers, and while Lauritz agrees to hug his brother, he is twisted in violent pain. The boy is taken to the hospital, and the doctors are shocked to see the size of the parasite inside the man. He undergoes surgery, but the worm survives. The doctors intend to examine it because they have never seen anything like it before, but Lauritz intends to keep it. That evening, Fjord and Saxa meet in a secluded spot to discuss the matter. Fjord speaks of Magne's guilt and of his intention to leave with Gry. His sister accuses him of cowardice and she leaves. The day of Vidar's funeral arrives. Magne announces that he's not going to the funeral, but his mother asks him to do so for Lauritz's sake. At this point, the boy leaves the room. He has changed his image again and now looks very much like his father. Magne runs away, unable to see his brother. He comes to the mountain and asks for his powers. He has killed the man and lost his brother. Receiving no answer, Magne goes to the church, where he is rebuked by Lauritz, who sits in the pew of the Util family. The inhabitants of Edda sing psalms, remembering Vidar, without noticing the storm that is coming upon the city. The priest reads a scripture recalling the son's duty to his father, and this is heard by Fjord, who does come to the funeral. Suddenly there is a thunderclap. Magne prays for his powers to be taken away, and Fjord goes to his father's coffin. And the moment the coffin is carried out of the altar, there is a tremendous thunderclap, and all the panes of glass fly out of the windows. Later, Gry and her mother pack up their belongings. The girl waits for Fjord, but he does not come. Instead, it's Magne who comes to say goodbye to the girl. She then goes up to Fjord's house to fetch him. But suddenly he refuses to go. There is something more precious than her. Seeing the change in his eyes, Gry runs away and asks her mother to leave quickly. The younger Utul goes to the top of the mountain and pulls out the ancient Vidar world axe buried there. The monstrous serpent Midgardsorm is the spawn of Loki. Thor defeats the serpent in the last battle of Ragnarok. Magne wakens from a terrible dream. Isolde looks at him with a reproachful look. He falls down the stairs. He cannot see a thing. Turid brings him his spectacles. Magne understands what has happened. The strength has failed him. That same morning, Saxa admonishes Ran. The woman is abusing alcohol, and Ran wonders whether the girl is indifferent to Vidar's death. The girl nods in agreement. She does not feel anything. She hurries to the factory, but when she enters the floor, she finds Fjord at the desk. He has assumed the duties of the supervisor according to the statute. He exposes Saxa and removes the photo with Gry. Magne goes to Wotan, but he chases the weakling away. Neither Iman nor Harry recognize him anymore. Grieving Lauritz goes to Utilheim, where Rand demands his key back and confirms that Vidar intended to kill him. Meanwhile, Magne is preparing for the exam when Erich makes a remark. The guy puts too much emphasis on this story everyone already knows. It would be much better if you looked at those events from a modern perspective. Magne objects. If good triumphs over evil, it becomes evil itself. Erich is pleased. The moral of the myths is very interesting stuff. At this point, Iman discovers her English grades and becomes indignant. Her language skills are perfect. The grades are all wrong. The girl goes to Ran and uses her powers to get her grades corrected. Meanwhile, Turid discovers that Lauritz has some kind of monster in the aquarium which she finds disgusting. Magne learns that Iman has used her powers to change the grades. He reminds her that the powers are not for personal use. But the girl retorts, he's nobody now, and she does not care what he thinks. Turid demands that the creature be removed from the house, but she's forced to agree to her son's wish when he reminds her of the loss of his father. On his way home, Magne witnesses Harry beating up a guy who wanted to cheat and did not pay for gas. He intervenes but again receives a reminder that his opinion is no longer valued. Later he asks Lauritz to forgive him, for he sincerely wanted to protect his brother. He renounced his powers and they were taken away. The brothers embrace, but Loki refuses to help in the battle. Fjord begins to run the firm's affairs with an iron fist and fires Turid for personal reasons. Upon learning this, Magne rushes to the factory and attacks Fjord, oblivious to the fact that his powers no longer exist. Utul ends up beating him and leaving him lying in the parking lot, telling him he doesn't even deserve to die. The battered lad goes to Wotan and asks for permission to rejoin the ranks of the fighters on the condition that he won't kill, but he's reminded that there is no other way of doing it. After Fjord's return, Ren takes his side, especially since Magne has lost his powers. Now the company is the first priority. Saxa is against the new policy, but nobody listens to her. Magne's new sympathizer Signy urges the guy to keep fighting Util Industries while Saxa convinces Lauritz to vote against Fjord. After all, he's a member of the family. In exchange, she offers him the key to Utilheim and money. In the evening, Lauritz comes to the Utils and Fjord has to greet his brother. Meanwhile, Magne goes for a run and sees the installation of the stone on Isolde's tomb. After dinner, Fjord inquires about Lauritz's expectations. He reminds him that Lauritz is also a giant. Fjord is willing to buy his vote because he has much more money than Saxa does. Ran takes Lauritz home and warns him to stay away from her family. Lauritz scoffs. Even as a bastard, he is related to Vidar, while the others are not really family. The whole thing is a farce to those around them as they are barren. Enraged, Ran follows him into the house and attacks Lauritz. Magne tries to help but to no avail. Ran openly promises to destroy his family for the powers have left Magne. But suddenly Turid comes home and Ran leaves. Magne decides to do what he can to win the war and returns to Wotan to regain his powers. Wotan reminds him that his greatest weapon is Mjolnir, his only chance against the giants. Magne agrees to lie to Lauritz and get the key to Utilheim. The team of warriors go to the Utils factory as Odin reminds them shortly before that they have everything they need to make the hammer, Volva's feather and Ran's arrowhead. At the mention of the dwarf's name, Halvor enters the room. All that remains is to find the eternal flame, which can only be found somewhere in the factory. Once inside, the team goes to the old warehouse, but suddenly they see guards. Wotan Odin is summoned to divert their attention while they forge the hammer. The old man comes out into the light and pretends he can't walk. The guards are puzzled, but remembering their orders to guard this building particularly closely, they take the old man to the gatehouse, reporting the incident to Fjord. Harry intends to break the lock on the warehouse, but Magne pulls out the key he snatched from Lauritz, lying that he intends to impress Signy by hanging a protest banner in the util warehouse. Once inside, the team begins looking for the fire, but there is no such thing in sight. Magne reads the words of the saga and everyone understands there must be a dungeon. It must be nearby, and while Iman stays behind to keep watch, the others descend into the cellar and find the ancient forge with the eternal fire blazing. That's when Fjord arrives at the factory, and while the team is working on the hammer, Iman comes out to fight. Under the blows of the sledgehammer, the ancient iron, the feather and the tip of the giant's weapon are fused together. Meanwhile, upstairs there's a deadly battle, and Iman begins to suffer defeat. Harry asks to finish the job and he goes up to rescue his friend. All that remains is to chop the hilt, but Halvor has never done such a thing and it comes out too short. But Magne approves of the dwarf's work, cools the finished hammer and hurries upstairs. Harry orders everyone to run and restrains Fjord himself, but the man throwing him back against the door slams it shut, amputating a part of his arm. Iman returns to help, ordering Magne to remove the hammer from the factory. The police arrive and now Halvor goes to them, diverting attention from Magne. The boy gets out of the factory and goes home, where he's greeted by his mother and brother congratulating Magne on his birthday, which he has completely forgotten about. The media reports about a break-in at the factory, a protest banner posted, and the arrest of 4 people. Magne admits that he too was part of the group, and contrary to his fears, Turid takes it calmly. Without even unpacking the presents, Magne goes to the mountain and tries to abandon Mjolnir, but the strength never returns. Magne calls Iman, the hammer doesn't work, and she tells him to do whatever it takes to succeed. He returns home, where Turid asks the boys to go get burgers. They go to a cafe where Signy approves of the action, and Lauritz tries to get the bartender's attention. At this time, there is a report on TV about the impending closure of the util factories because it has been proven that the production has polluted the environment. In addition, tax evasion has been revealed. Saxa also listens to this report. She tries to rectify the situation and asks for a press conference. Meanwhile, the director of the orphanage fires Iman and Halvor, which provokes protests from the residents. Wotan gives a fiery speech thanking the real heroes and sings the national anthem in their honor. Magne is trying to figure out what to do with Mjolnir when Turid asks her to bring Lauritz things. She's afraid to go into his room because of the horrible pet. Confused, the boy goes into the room and sees a nightmarish worm, a veritable spawn of hell. Lauritz arrives at the cafe where Iman and Harry are resting and catches the bartender in the arms of the expert. The disappointed guy walks away. Meanwhile, Fjord announces that he is moving his production to Asia, where governments are more loyal to business. Turid goes to work at the store for the first time that day. Meanwhile, many residents of Edda are afraid that they might lose their jobs and homes. Lauritz, who has given up hope of finding love, feeds his worm, while Magne rereads the ancient tales of Thor again and again. And suddenly it hits him: Thor was created by lightning. And then there is a news announcement on TV that the Norwegian government is backing down on closing the utils factories, as it realized that it will lead to massive job losses. Besides, the owners have promised to fix the spill. Fjord celebrates his victory while Magne is outraged. His rage electrifies the air around him. He then hears a knocking sound coming from his room. The boy rushes upstairs, sees that the window is open and the hammer is twitching. He picks up Mjolnir, and at that moment Lauritz enters the room too. Lauritz realizes that his brother lied to him. He crafted a weapon that can kill him too. Without answering, Magne goes out into the storm, extends the hammer to the sky, and awakens Mjolnir, holding it in the air until lightning strikes it. His powers return. In Utilheim, Fjord and Ran learn that Saxa has given the key to Lauritz and punish her for her treachery. After that, they leave to kill the boy. Magne goes to Utilheim to face Fjord but finds Saxa beaten. She sees the hammer and he suddenly feels sorry for the wounded girl. But she does not tell him anything about her family's intention to kill Lauritz. Meanwhile, Lauritz is home alone and hears the enemies approach the house. Saxa tries to persuade Magne to act together while Lauritz hides in the kitchen. Ran does not notice him. Magne understands Saxa's intentions and Ran hears the sound the worm makes in the room. Thinking she has put Magne's vigilance to sleep, Saxa rushes for the hammer, but Magne is ahead of her and is ready to drop the hammer on her head. Meanwhile, Fuhr catches Lauritz. In Utelheim, a spark flashes between the young men and they grow close. Lauritz begs for mercy and declares that he alone possesses a weapon that can kill Magne. As Fuhr and Ren are about to leave, Magne appears on the street and attacks them with the Mjolnir. The hammer hits the Utel's car and it explodes. Magne picks up Lauritz, who is battered but still alive, and he promises to forgive his brother for deceiving him. In the morning, he carries his creepy pet to the shore of the morass and after kissing it, lets it go free. He wishes his creature to go big and strong and to avenge all his enemies. Ren and Fuhr watch this from the shore. The show has had mixed reviews, from good to outright bad. But there's one thing that the viewers agree on: this story is quite compelling. The problem of today, environment, is organically integrated into the plot as one of the key elements of the story. And of course it's impossible to stay indifferent to the views of the harsh but so beautiful Scandinavian nature. Thanks to the high ratings, the show has been reviewed for a third season this year, 2023.